Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these in the future timeline. Albus, I need to talk to you, Moody said, sighing after their usual meeting of the Order of the Phoenix ended. Of course, my friend, Albus Dumbledore answered, but Moody still waited until the kitchen in Grimmauld Place was empty before even thinking about continuing. Well, my friend, what troubles you? Moody frowned at that inwardly. Did Dumbledore truly think of him as a friend, or was he just a weapon, ready for use? Until now, Moody had never distrusted Dumbledore's friendship, but there were some questionable things in the past now that couldn't be explained with a laugh and a wink, and unlike before, Harry James Potter had opened Moody's eyes for them. There are some rumors I want to talk about, Moody finally said, and the twinkle in Dumbledore's eyes ceased to exist. Rumors? He asked, sounding a little bit concerned. New ones? Yes, Moody sighed. Well, what did the Ministry come up this time around? Dumbledore said, resigned, and Moody felt nearly bad for starting with the words he had. But then it was the easiest explanation. There are rumors about you joining the fight with Grindelwald late, he said anyway, watching Dumbledore's face closely. Rumors that you refused to do anything before he was at the height of his power. At that, Dumbledore's cheerful face twisted into a grimace before smoothing out again. It seems that the Malfoy family is at its peak again, he said, sighing, and Moody frowned. Malfoy? Why Malfoy? Why do you think it's the Malfoys, Albus? He asked, half confused and half afraid that Harry James Potter had gained that information from an unreliable source. Because it's always them and the Blacks accusing me of having done nothing in the war with Grindelwald, Dumbledore answered. Moody raised an eyebrow at that. The Malfoy family and the Blacks accuse you of Grindelwald's reign? He asked, disbelieving. Dumbledore just sighed. It's actually more the Malfoy family and not their British branch, Dumbledore corrected. But in the end, yes, they and the Blacks do. It's not even truly explainable. We've worked well together the day we brought down Grindelwald. Your father would have told you the same if he had survived that day. Moody frowned at that. He himself had been a 10-year-old child back then, a child who had adored Albus Dumbledore because his mother and father seemed to do the same. Of course he had heard about the battle in which his father had died. Moody had wanted to be exactly like his dad back then, and because of that had done everything to be not seen as a child, but a friend by Albus Dumbledore like his father had been. And yet it hadn't been Albus who had told his mother about his father's death. I've never found out how my father died that day, Moody said nearly silently, averting his eyes to hide the truth from Albus' all-knowing stare, and Albus smiled at him, a sad smile at that. He died a hero, my friend, Albus Dumbledore said. I'm sorry, he died protecting me while I was trying to get my cousin to safety. The tired voice of a dirty and grim man in rags echoed through Moody's mind, a voice he remembered from when he was 10. It had been the worst day in his life, back then, and yet it had shown him exactly what a man his father had been. We had planned ahead, but there were complications. It didn't go as planned, another tired and haggard man said when the first one couldn't say anything anymore. I was too late to shield him. In the end, it's my fault that he died. But he knew that we had to stop Grindelwald, Dumbledore continued. In the end, he died willingly for the greater good. Alastor Moody had known Albus Dumbledore for his whole life. He knew that his mother and father had loved the man as a good friend, one of their best friends. And yet, Alastor Moody remembered the day he heard about his father's death as the day Albus Dumbledore, hero and defeater of Grindelwald, hadn't been there to comfort his mum. He's a busy man right now, his mother had said with a shaky voice. He must be exhausted, and Alastor had believed her, because Albus Dumbledore had always been a good friend of his parents, a good man, and Alastor had hero-worshipped him long before the day he defeated Grindelwald. And yet, there had been two men on their doorstep the same day his father died, ragged, dead on their feet, and yet determined to tell his mother what had happened to her husband. And now, 50 years later, Moody wondered suddenly why Albus Dumbledore hadn't come that day when the heir of House Black had found the time to do so. The wizarding world was rejoicing that day, Dumbledore mused, lost in his memory. It was a great day for wizarding Europe. I'm sure your father would have loved to see that his sacrifice ensured our victory. And yet you don't even know how he died, Moody thought to himself, and his respect of Albus Dumbledore fell a little bit more. You have no idea how the man you called one of your best friends actually died. Moody would have wanted to know if it had been his. I still don't understand how the Blacks and Malfoys think that you could have done more that day. Moody grumbled. Albus Dumbledore sighed. The head of Malfoy back then was a very driven man, he said. He was allied with the Blacks and some others like the Princes. There were also some other wizard families from all over Europe, part of his group like the Delacour from France and the Eichingers from Germany. He and his allies entered the battle with Grindelwald unprepared and never forgave me for saving them. Albus Dumbledore shook his head sadly. They were just minutes from total annihilation, yet refused to see it even after we saved them. Pride, I guess. Then Albus smiled at Moody again. Don't worry about those rumors, he said. Like I said, the Malfoys hold a grudge. I'm quite sure it will blow over within a few days. It's old news, after all. Moody nodded. All right, Albus, he said. Whatever you say. With that, he left. Delacour's, he thought to himself. He knew the old head of Delacour's. The man had also been a good friend of his father, and like with Dumbledore, Moody had basically grown up with the man. Seems that I have to ask the old man what he has to say to the Battle of Grindelwald. And unlike ever before, Moody was ready to listen to the old man and his ramblings about Sal's Sanctuary and Mad Marius, two names Moody had heard in the past from the old man's lips, but never truly taken for truth. I'll also have to talk to Potter, Moody mused. I need to know where he got that information. The leaky cauldron was full of people. They all were discussing in hushed voices the minister's speech. Do you truly think that the minister was right? One of the regulars said in that moment. Twist, a disturber of peace. Another man snorted at that. Nah, we all know that the minister's always been talking a lot of humbug, he answered. The regular. Can't believe he's going against a lad, an old witch said harshly. He should be ashamed of himself. He should, others agreed darkly. Can't imagine where he got that liar bit from, Tom, the owner of the leaky cauldron added. I verified a lot of his articles. No lie there. Yeah, and didn't the ministry just now say that the fellow Twist was talking about and asking about his missing trial, you know? Black was actually innocent. Another man said, frowning. They basically proved the boy right and now he's called a liar. Tom sighed at that. And that article about Riddle, you know, that interesting one, another witch said, her eyes lighting up with delight. I even went and looked into it, he's right. You know, right. Can't imagine he's lied with the others if he did his research in that one. In that moment, Zeno Lovegood entered. I've got a special edition, Tom, he said. Twist asked me to do it after yesterday's wizarding wireless speech of the minister. Immediately the whole room turned to Lovegood. Well, where is it? One of them asked, when Zeno unpacked his bag not fast enough for the waiting crowd. Zeno blinked a little bit confused at the man who had asked him before turning to Tom. The usual number of quibblers, he asked. Tom looked at the shark eyes of the men and women behind Zeno which were watching said man like predators their prey. Ugh. How many you've got in your bag there, Zeno? He asked a little bit nervously when the shark eyes of the crowd lit up in an unholy light, their gaze fixed on the newspapers in unsuspecting Zeno's hands. Said man looked at him confused. About the treble of what I normally give you, he said. Tom's gaze trailed to the predators behind Zeno. He gulped. Give them all to me, he said, nearly begging. I'm sure I'll be able to sell them somehow. The gaze of the unholy shark eyes met his. Tom gulped again. I'm sure I will. Just a day after the Slytherin incident, Hermione found Harry in the common room writing on a parchment. To his left sat an oddly old-looking book. But that book was closed and Harry was writing. What are you doing, Harry? Harry looked up just to see Hermione standing behind him. I am planning, he answered unconcerned. Hermione frowned. Planning? You told me yourself that we need someone else to teach us defense against the dark arts, Harry answered. You even tried to rope me in teaching you. Yes. Well, I decided that I will do the teaching, Harry interrupted her. Hermione stared at him and then she squealed and hugged him. I knew you would come around, she cried happily. Yes. Mayon, breath, Harry coughed while he desperately tried to get some air in his lungs. Oh, sorry, Hermione exclaimed and let him go. Instead, she turned to his papers. So, what are you planning exactly? Lessons, Harry answered. And a way to communicate. Well, the last one I could help you with, Hermione said and then explained to him everything about the coins she had been preparing. Harry was impressed. So, what lessons are you planning to teach? Hermione asked. Harry just shrugged. I thought about some basics first, he answered. Shields and disarming mostly, maybe a simple ward or two. After that some light curses like stunning and so on, you know, 4th year and upwards stuff. I have also some deadly ones on my list for later. Deadly? Hermione stared at him. Harry, you are teaching defense. And sometime you can only defend someone by killing another one, Harry answered. I am not willing to teach those children that there will never be a time when they might have to kill, because with Riddle out there might be a time when they have to kill to survive. When I teach them, I will not stop teaching them stuff just because someone thinks they should not learn it. But killing, Hermione hesitated. Isn't that part of the dark arts? Harry shrugged. He was not willing to tell Hermione that a lot of spells he had chosen for his lessons would have been labeled dark today. If they were remembered, that is. Harry knew from experience that there was no real dark or light magic, there was just magic, and he wasn't willing to let anyone be in danger because he stopped teaching at a barrier the law had built because of stupidly. They're no nasty ones, he said, and I chose them as a last resort for the others. I don't want them to learn killing, I want them to learn surviving. And sometimes you cannot survive without killing your enemy first. But still, Hermione, he stopped her before she could protest. This is something that has to be. I cannot teach them stunners and let it be. They will die if there is no way for them to absolutely stop. Death Eaters. I will not teach them spells to maim or something like that, and I know the ones I am teaching them could kill. The thing that they could but don't have to. I plan on teaching them spells to harm a person so that said person will not stand up again. This is not trying to teach them killing, this is trying to teach them surviving. But Dumbledore might have good intentions but definitely is not right about this, Hermione. As cruel as it sounds, the lives of the helpless come first. I will not teach anyone to kill unnecessarily, but I also don't want them to hesitate. Those that cannot protect themselves have to come first, and Death Eaters are last. That's war. I will not tell them otherwise. But Harry, Dumbledore says that Death Eaters could regret. They could, Harry answered, irritated with the girl, but I am not interested in someone that maybe will regret. My first goal is to stop Death Eaters from killing or maiming other students. If they have to die to be stopped, so may it be. That sounds cruel, Hermione said nervously, and Dumbledore and my parents, they all say that killing is. Hermione, Harry interrupted the girl. Do you still have a grandpa? Huh? Uncomprehending, Hermione nodded. Yes. How old is he? 86. So he might have fought in World War II, Harry said. Just ask him if he has, and ask him if he has killed or if he knows someone that has, and then ask him why. I am sure that he will tell you because he had to. He was a soldier, and soldiers die and kill. The students I will teach might not be soldiers, but they also will have the same choice one day. As long as Tom Riddle still exists, there will be no peace, and as long there is no peace, there will be the need to defend yourself. I will not let anyone be killed, because I did not teach them that there might be the possibility of killing someone or of dying yourself. I will not be that cruel to them. Hermione opened her mouth to disagree, but then she just turned and stormed off. Harry knew that she had not taken well what he had said to her, but he also was sure that she would see reason. She might be a little authority-loving, but she still was not someone that did not do their research first. And when Harry was right, she would do as suggested and write her grandpa. And maybe the old man would see it like Harry did. And even if not, Harry shrugged and turned back to his work. He would not stop with his plan. He knew that some things were more important than the feelings of a single person, and he would not let die the others just because one person could not see reason. He was after all not Dumbledore, caught in the net of the greater good and without the ability to look out for anything else except of his own beliefs. Tom Marvolo Riddle, to the world known as the feared Dark Lord Voldemort, was seething with anger. The reason for it? A single vampire who had decided to inhabit his throne room in Malfoy Manor. Said vampire one Anastasius Sanguini was currently taking a lot of pleasure in quoting one well-known article of Oliver Twist to the raging Dark Lord. Well, at least the article had been well known for the rest of the wizarding world. Voldemort had tried hard to forget it. After all, the only one who ever handed out the killing curse like sweets in the last decades was you-know-who, Anastasius said in that moment, stopping and looking up from his reading. And he truly had to look up, considering he was hanging upside down in the candelabra. You know, he mused absent-mindedly, this nearly sounded like a comparison with Dumbledore. Isn't he famous for handing out sweets to everyone? Voldemort hissed with fury at that and aimed his wand at the vampire. Sadly enough, like every other curse he had tried to use on his new ally, the curse didn't hit his target, who had ducked out of the way as if it was a play. The vampire cackled. Just asking, he said, amused. No need to get grumpy. Then a thoughtful frown showed on the face of the vampire. Still, he said, it's oddly fitting, isn't it? Dumbledore hands out candy and you copy him by handing out curses. After that musing, the vampire had to vacate his spot for some minutes since there was a firework of spells hitting the candelabra. He simply changed the candelabra and hung from the other, clearly not concerned with the spells that had nearly hit him. Don't worry, he said instead. Your style of clothing is totally different. There's no way to confuse you two. Again, Voldemort aimed at the vampire and fired. The spells hit the candelabra, and just a daring jump saved the vampire when the candelabra he had been on crashed to the floor. I guess the head Malfoy will have to redecorate his manor the moment you leave. The vampire mused. I don't think that magic will simply fix this mess. The vampire looked thoughtfully from his perch on the other one at the shattered and smoking candelabra on the floor. This looks like nasty dark magic, he commented. Nope, definitively not fixable. Then his eyes returned to the newspaper in his hands and they lightened up in unholy fire. Oh, there! I bet you will like this one, he exclaimed joyfully. Listen, so the first fact I have to tell you is that the man who brought war on us until he was stopped by Harry Potter was a lying coward. I cannot fathom how any respectable pure blood can follow someone who cowardly hides behind a false name. The vampire cackled again. But it gets better here, where he calls you actually a mudblood, you know? The vampire crowed. Well, uneducated mudblood, actually. Voldemort growled at that and took again aim at the vampire, who was transfixed with the article. You know, the vampire mused. I actually think Twist has a point here. No pure blood lord would follow a half-blood who rejects the old name of Gaunt just to spout of a secondary name, even if it's more famous, like Slytherin, whose family first carried a lordship years after the Gaunts. Yeah, that sounds about right, you know. I mean, Slytherin is a well and good name, but compared to Gaunt, well. The vampire stopped at that moment to dance through some curses that were flying towards him from the Dark Lord's wand. But then, you don't seem to know how to be a guest either, meaning you must have truly grown up uneducated. I mean, destroying the ballroom just because you don't like the decor, that's nothing a proper guest should do. And with a cackle, the vampire rescued himself from another salve of spells aimed at him by the enraged Dark Lord. Lucius Malfoy, meanwhile, stood in the shadows and watched. I guess the vampire has a point, Narcissa said in that moment. She was standing and watching next to him. Riddle is absolutely uneducated in our ways. She sneered at that before turning. I want him out by the Wizengamot meeting in January, love, she said coolly. And don't forget to bill Riddle for my ballroom vases and furniture, will you, dear? Lucius sighed at that, not daring to object his enraged wife. She had loved the decor of the ballroom, and had stopped to call the man anything with Lord the moment the man had destroyed her precious vase from Egypt. Lucius? Riddle hissed in that moment, and Lucius sighed again before stepping out of his hiding place. Yes, Rat. My lord? He asked. I want your son to look out for this twist. Do you understand? Voldemort hissed. I want to know everything about him and ensure that he will succeed, because you don't want to live if he doesn't. Am I clear? Lucius gulped nervously at that. Yes, my lord, he stuttered. That was the moment the vampire crowed happily at something he read. Oh, listen, listen, listen. He howled with gleaming eyes. And a ban on Riddle will be a hard thing to add. After all, it's such a common word. This will be extremely hard to circumvent if people follow that advice. He cackled. What will you do if they do? Will you change your name to Dark Lord Riddle? And with that, Voldemort's attention returned to his tries to hit the vampire with a curse. Lucius turned and left. Riddle. Indeed, Lucius would quite happily follow Twist in that motion. But then, a ban on Riddle will be a hard thing to add. After all, it's such a common word. Twist had truly been right in that regard. Blaise Zabini didn't know what to think when he and his mother were brought a simple room. There were some leather chairs and a desk out of dark wood. The room had no windows, and the walls were covered by the same dark wood the desk was made of. The floor was made of stone, and candles were the only light in the room. Behind the desk was a simple crest displayed. He heard his mother inhale sharply when she saw the crest. Mother? He asked, frowning, and she turned to him, her eyes wide with excitement and fear. It seems that your regent already knows who is asking you for an alliance, Lord Zabini, a cool voice stated, and Blaise turned around fast, just to see a boy his age entering the room. Cool green eyes met his startled brown. The boy rounded them and the desk and sat down in the chair behind it. Let me tell you the deal, he said. Blaise listened. He saw his mother frown at the conditions of the family. Blaise instead heard something different altogether. He knew that the most people of Slytherin were bound to go to the Dark Lord. They saw it as their highest quest to follow the Dark Lord. Blaise, like the Green Grasses and Theodore Nott, was not truly interested in following a madman, and the man was mad, whatever Blaise's mother said about it. So hearing that if he followed the Grand Family, he actually was forbidden to enter the Dark Lord's service. I'm sorry, my lord, but my son and I, his mother started to say in that moment, and Blaise suddenly knew that she was basically trying to take the choice from him before he could even think about answering different. I accept, he said. He didn't care that he had no idea which family he was joining, because unlike his mother, he didn't recognize the crest, but he also didn't care. This was his ticket out of the trap he had found himself into since his father died. I humbly accept your proposition, my lord, Blaise repeated, and his mother frowned at him. Blaise, she started to say, but the first time since his father died, Blaise dared to look her in the eye. No, mother, he said coolly. I am the lord. It is my decision, and I have decided. She opened her mouth, then closed it again when Blaise spoke up again. If you don't want to follow my decision, I will evict you from my house, he told her. Coolly, don't worry, I don't adore Dumbledore or anything like that, but I will take this chance even if it goes against your wishes. His mother's frown deepened at that, but in the end, she bowed her head. As you wish, she said, not that she had had a choice in that matter. Even killing Blaise wouldn't have changed the fact that House Zabini would now be allied with the upcoming Grand Family. After all, the moment Blaise as the Lord of the House had accepted, the alliance had been established, and his mother as the regent had no say in that since Blaise had turned 15 already. The young man on the other side of the desk smiled at Blaise. Then I welcome you to my family, Lord Zabini, he said. Blaise smiled at the other boy hesitatingly. Blaise, he offered. The other boy's smile broadened at that. Blaise, he repeated, and then stood. He went to the door, but stopped next to Blaise to whisper one sentence in his ear. I'm Salvazeher, he said, but you may call me Harry in school. Blaise's eyes widened and the door closed behind the other teen. A snake in a lion's den, indeed. Garrick Ollivander sighed tiredly. It was the late evening, and he had been finishing the last touches of his work since long before sunrise. But needs must, he mumbled to himself. Needs must. That didn't change the fact that it had been far too long, that he had had a decent rest. He was tired. Since he had seen the Staff of Destiny, he had dedicated his time to set up everything so that he was done when it was time. Oh, he was aware that whole Diagon Alley was sure that he had gone round the bend, but unlike them, he knew what followed that staff. He had seen it, not once, not twice, but thrice, at least. His father had seen it. His grandfather had seen it. Ollivander would be a fool to not heed the warning he had gotten. Morgan, Grindelwald, Voldemort. Every time the staff had been there, drawn in the Ollivander family, calling for them, working with them, leading them. No, Ollivander was no fool. The look of the man who carried it might have changed. The name the man bore might have changed as well, but it didn't change the fact that the Staff of Destiny was back to wreak havoc. Oh, Sal, Ollivander sighed. What are you planning this time? Not that Ollivander really cared. His father had followed the man who carried this staff. His grandfather had, his great-grandfather had as well. Ollivander would be damned if he wouldn't do the same again. In that moment a lonely owl descended down towards him. He held up his arm and removed the letter it carried the moment it sat down on it. The owl hooted at that before leaping in the air again, leaving. Ollivander looked at the seal of the letter. His breathing hitched. Then he closed his eyes before slowly breaking the seal. Only one sentence was written on the parchment in black ink. Wizengamot meeting in January. Sel. And here I thought we would have some more time for the apocalypse. Ollivander sighed tiredly. But then, he was dealing with him. Ollivander should have guessed that chaos would follow his wake as fast as possible. I'm not feeling sorry for you, Albus Dumbledore, Ollivander murmured to himself. No, I'm definitely not sorry for you. Maybe he was, at least a little bit, a tiny, tiny little bit. Poor soul. But then, everything had been Albus Dumbledore's fault in the first place, hadn't it been? Well, not everything, Ollivander mused. But definitely enough, definitely enough. Poor soul. Lady Longbottom, ma'am. Augusta Longbottom looked up from her reading to look at one of her house elves who stood in front of her, wringing its hands. Yes? She asked regally. You've got a guest, Lady Longbottom, ma'am, the house elf said, and she raised her right eyebrow. Who is it? She asked, a little bit surprised, considering the late hour. Dead person, Lady Longbottom, ma'am, the house elf replied, sounding a lot more sure this time around. Augusta's left eyebrow joined her right. A dead person is visiting me, she repeated in disbelief. The house elf nodded eagerly at that. Yes, Lady Longbottom, ma'am, it said. Should Carly bring visitor to Lady Longbottom, ma'am? Augusta blinked at that, not truly comprehending what was happening. Had the house elf gone around the bend? Bring them in the visitor's room. I will join them there soon, she finally replied, unsure what else to say. She had been raised as a lady, but all her training hadn't prepared her for something like that. She guessed that she would have to trust her wards and hope that whoever had come to visit wasn't truly dead or a Death Eater. Still, she slipped her wand in her hand and a portkey to a safe house before going down into the visitor's room, joining her mysterious guest. When she entered, for a moment she thought that ex-convict Sirius Black had entered her home, but then the man turned. His face was rounder than Sirius Black's, his eyes darker, but still, the resemblance was great. She frowned at the stranger and gripped her wand harder. Who are you? She asked. The man looked at her with an assessing gaze. Salvatio Malfoy sends me, he said. He hopes you like his new article in the Quibbler today. At that, Augusta relaxed her grip on her wand a little bit. No one except of her and Professor Malfoy even knew that she knew who truly wrote those articles. Who are you? She repeated. Anyway. The man bowed at that. I am Regulus Arcturus Black, heir secundus of House Black, he answered. I am here to ask for an alliance between our houses and your aid in a quest of mine. Augusta frowned at that. Sirius Black is the future lord of the House of Black, she said. And the man who should be dead in front of her inclined his head again. You shouldn't even be alive to. I was saved by Salvatio Malfoy, Lady Longbottom, Regulus Arcturus Black replied. He fought for my life for 6 years, until I was finally well enough to survive on my own again. I can't tell you how often I nearly died in these 6 years. 6 years? Augusta repeated, surprised, and Regulus Black sighed. I was after something Riddle used to bind himself to life, he said. He had it hidden away behind powerful spells and a potion. I had to drink the potion, which trapped me in my nightmares and slowly but surely killed me. If it had been any other wizard rescuing me than Salvatore Malfoy, I would have been dead within days. And yet you have been free from that potion for a while now and still preferred to stay dead officially, Augusta remarked, and was surprised when the man in front of her grimaced. I would have stayed happily dead if Sal wouldn't have decided to send me here, he replied. I never planned to return. And yet here you are asking for an alliance between our houses, Augusta said while raising an eyebrow. Regulus inclined his head again. My brother has yet refused to take up his lordship, he said. As such, I can ask for an alliance between our houses. It is the only thing I can give you that shows you that I am who I say I am. It's also the only thing I can offer as an apology for the deeds a family member of my house has done to family members of your house. Augusta's eyes narrowed at that. So you still claim Bellatrix Lestrange as a member of your family? She asked coolly. The man in front of her snorted at that. I have no choice in that matter until either Sirius dies or he claims lordship and kicks her out, the young man replied, and Augusta had to suppress a smile. She guessed that she might come to like the heir secundus of Black. Is there anything else you can offer? She asked him coolly anyway. Regulus Black sighed at that. Sal and I had an idea how to help your son and his wife. We can't guarantee it, but I am willing to try and help them in any way I can. If I can't help them, I am willing to do anything to repay what House Longbottom has lost. Thanks to a member of House Black, he answered. Augusta thought that over. In the end she nodded, giving permission for the alliance. The young man took it instantly. House Black offers alliance to House Longbottom, to follow where they go, to protect if they need protection, to support if they need support, to fight side by side until our houses cease to exist or this alliance fails. So I, Regulus Arcturus Black, heir secundus of Black, swear. A blue mist rose from the Black heir's body to show the flowing crest of black over the heir's head. The House Longbottom accepts the offer of House Black, if House Black holds true to its oath from now until the time of the Wizengamot meeting in January or until it evicts Bellatrix Lestrange, née Black, from its house. If former comes first, then House Longbottom will be willing to return the oath to them. So I, Augusta Elizabeth Longbottom, Regent of House Longbottom, swear. The moment she said that, the crest of black was pierced through by the Longbottom crest, and in a firework-like shower of magic the magic settled. Now tell me, Heir Black, whatever for do you need my help? Regulus smiled at that. I've been asked to go on a quest quite similar than the one I mentioned before, he said. I need to know where the Gaunts last lived. Some hours later, a pair of people was sitting in the first light of the sun in Lyon in France, enjoying their breakfast, when a normal-looking barn owl arrived at the table. You've got a letter, Nick, Perenelle said while bringing said letter and breakfast to the table. Nicholas Flamel looked up from his newspaper. I have? He asked. Who is it from? I don't know the signet, Perenelle answered, but it looks formal. Nicholas took the letter and also took a glance at the signet. It was a simple snake winding itself round a simple lily. Nicholas stared at it. He knew that there were just a few signets which had a lily in it. The most prominent ones the House Emrys and Nicholas' own house. The snake was also not often used. The houses Malfoy and Slytherin. The Slytherin signet, Nicholas said. This one belongs to Slytherin. So, the letter is from this foul creature who calls himself Salazar Slytherin's heir, Perenelle asked. No, I don't think so. He would never use the original signet, Nicholas answered. I bet he doesn't even know of the lily in the signet. So who? I don't know, Nicholas answered and finally opened the letter. My dear old friend. Wizengamot meeting in January. I am sorry. Your old friend. Me. So who has written you? Perenelle asked. It is our boy, Nicholas answered. It seems he has enough of British politicians and decided to fix things the other way. But the signet? Well, someone seems to have more secrets than I even thought he has. So, He is a true heir of the house? Who knows? Nicholas chuckled. Who knows? What will you do now? Nicholas smiled. Then he slowly stood up from the breakfast table. I will pack, he answered. So you will? I think it is time to step down, Nicholas confirmed. Maybe the boy was right and there was no way to forgive this time around. Amelia Bones sighed and sat down the newspaper she had been reading. It seemed that Minister Fudge had finally gone too far in his ambition to discredit Oliver Twist. She sighed again and then looked at the paper file next to the newspaper. It was an official notice of a trial. It had been filed by Xenophilius Lovegood, Harry James Potter, and one Salvatio Malfoy, the shareholders of the Quibbler. The accused, one Cornelius Oswald Fudge, for slander, harassment, wrong accusations, and threatening. Unfortunately, the minister winning this trial was nearly impossible, considering the evidence Amelia had verified for the barrister of the Quibbler, one Magnus Adam Selwyn. Amelia looked back at the article in the newspaper and sighed again. Even if the minister would be able to hold on to his title after all this, one further blunder and he would be gone. She wondered if Oliver Twist was just biding his time to destroy the minister fully, or if he had used all his information in the article right in front of her. But then, even if he had, it wouldn't matter. The chance of the minister holding on to his position until after the wizarding meeting in January, after all, this would be the meeting that would introduce several new lords into their ranks, and one of them was Harry Potter. Her gaze refocused onto the newspaper. There would be no way that Harry Potter wouldn't raise his voice against the minister after the minister's deeds in the past concerning him. Amelia guessed that the minister was already praying that Harry Potter would not join the Wizengamot in January, something Amelia doubted since in doing so Harry Potter would lose a lot of political clout and would be forced to wait until he turned 21 to do it again. No, Harry Potter, Amelia guessed, would join that day, and the minister could only pray that his eviction would happen without any other mishap. From the looks of Oliver Twist, Amelia guessed that it wouldn't. Twist was set on destroying the man, not that Amelia minded much. The minister on the warpath. Oliver Twist is a liar and a disturbance for our peaceful ways of life. He's just trying to bring the public to go against their government. If we don't do something soon, Oliver Twist will bring down our society with all the lies he's sprouting. Anyone recognizes this rant? Those are the words of the minister in the Wizengamot meeting yesterday, a public meeting solely to discredit a teenage boy whose words have always proven true until now. It's odd that the meeting was spread via the wizarding wireless while poor Oliver Twist was not even invited to tell his part of the story. Please note my sarcasm. Well, Minister, since you insisted on proclaiming me a liar and a disturbance for our peaceful ways of life, let's see what this disturbance can come up with this time around, and since you decided to pick apart my writing, I think I will have every right to pick apart your own doings. Don't you think so too? Now, dear Minister, let's have a look at your doings over the last years, if I remember correctly, and I'm quite sure that I do, but you might either question one Mr. Rubeus Hagrid, one Mr. Albus Dumbledore, or the Hogwarts rumour mill, or you might go to look at the list of Azkaban prisoners and look at the reason why they were arrested to confirm it. Our dear Minister decided to start his quest against our laws at least 3 years ago, when he imprisoned Mr. Rubeus Hagrid for the happenings at Hogwarts in Azkaban, solely because the ministry has to be seen doing something about it. Back then I was still an easily impressed child, but even then I wondered about the reason the minister proclaimed for the imprisonment of one Mr. Rubeus Hagrid. Of course, I can't say that I heard the minister proclaim this outrageous sentence, but like with every arrest, the reason, as proclaimed by the one who did the arrest, was recorded by the list of Azkaban. I still shudder, days after looking up the reason and seeing exactly this sentence spelled out on parchment. It gets even more distressing if you remember the lies I spoke just at the beginning of the new school year. I'm quite sure that you remember my lies about the trial of one Lord Potter. His trial sounds oddly like the reason the minister gave for arresting one Mr. Rubeus Hagrid back then, don't you think so too? Lord Potter proclaimed that the Dark Lord Tom Riddle was back, and suddenly he does magic in front of a muggle and is put on trial in front of the whole Wizengamot with the danger of losing his right to carry a wand. Of course, liar that I am, I couldn't see that the minister was surely right to condemn Lord Potter like he was right to condemn Mr. Rubeus Hagrid 3 years ago. And now, months later, I wonder how, I could write those lies and back them up with the ministry's own recording of the trial of Lord Potter. Of course, you could also add all those lies I sprouted about one Lord Sirius Orion Black, who was just proven innocent at the Wizengamot meeting before the last to it, and now please look up the recording of the last Wizengamot meeting, the one which proclaimed me a liar. Isn't it odd that the presumed liar was the one who proclaimed Lord Black innocent first? But well, let's go further into the career of our beloved minister. There was Harry Potter's 3rd year, the year when Lord Black escaped Azkaban. I remember the minister's very adamant choice to protect the children of Hogwarts, especially our beloved savior, by subjecting them to Dementors all year around. Of course, it was to protect our children. Who can fault the minister if said children suffer from nightmares every night and nearly get their souls sucked out more than once? That's, after all, still better than having a soul mass murderer trying to kill a soul child. After all, bringing more than 100 Dementors to Hogwarts is far cheaper than to give the endangered child a pair of bodyguards. If you don't believe me about the danger the Dementors proposed to the children of Hogwarts, maybe Madame Pomfrey will be willing to at least give you the approximate number of children that were brought to her because of being nearly kissed or because of nightmares all year long. There's also that one unforgettable Quidditch match that nearly killed Lord Potter and the rest of the Quidditch players when the Dementors decided to come by for a snack. It's odd that our dear minister was even allowed to bring the Dementors to Hogwarts, since there's a law in our law book that forbids them to even come near the British coast. As far as I could find out, the Dementors have a treaty with the Pendragon House, our liege lords, that tells exactly what the Dementors are allowed to do on Britain and what they aren't. And them being at Hogwarts broke that treaty more than once. But then, it was our minister's decision, and who can fault our minister, especially if the one who reasons against the minister is a truth-writing liar like me. I won't return to the triad about the treatment of Lord Potter and Cedric Diggory by the minister and the minister's refusal to even look for the truth about that incident at the end of the Triwizard tournament, but I can't help but add that within the last weeks, our dear minister has decided to prosecute another teenager, exactly like he did with Lord Potter at the end of the summer. Or what would you call it if the minister goes against a known teenage boy, proclaiming him a liar while there is evidence that he didn't lie once, and then sets out to orchestrate him from our community? I, for once, can only hope that his rant on the wizarding wireless won't end in me being chucked into Azkaban without a trial. After all, we've seen enough evidence that that might be exactly what the minister wants to archive. I am sorry for answering the minister's proclamation like this, but I fear that if I don't show the difference between our doings now, I will be the one facing dire consequences for innocent words. Oliver Twist. Somewhere in past timeline, in year 1398, Cliverol looked up from the book he was reading. Something was different. He frowned and closed his eyes to concentrate. What had happened? Even with his eyes closed, it took him a while until he could pinpoint the exact thing that had changed within the last minutes. It wasn't what he had expected. How? He whispered, confused. The answer was a whispered voice in the wind. Don't worry, Peveril, it said. It's all like it should be. Peveril's frown deepened at that. I'm quite sure that it isn't 15 years already, he said. You told me that with your help I could lock him away for 15 years without any consequences. There are always consequences, the voice replied, sighing. I promised you 15 years since 15 years was the time he lived without blood magic once. It was basically a reproduction of his life before the event. Peveril blinked at that. The event? He asked. It doesn't matter for you, the voice replied, and it won't matter from now on as well. He broke the circle. Now Peveril was totally confused. What circle? Rebirth circle, the voice replied with another sigh. We basically rebirthed him like a phoenix dies and is reborn. They die as an old bird in an ocean of flames and are reborn as a chick in ashes. His status as a phoenix born allows him a rebirth If I grant it to him, I did. So he was reborn, new and unencumbered. He was a child again, a real child without the burden of his previous life, exactly like the phoenix is for the first hours of his new life. Over time, his body started to remember his previous life, like it should be. His memories should have started to return soon, first in dreams, then in knowledge, and then for real. At that point of time, he would have slowly started up to do his blood magics again, and all would have been fine. And yet, this obviously hasn't happened, Peveril concluded darkly. It hasn't, the voice agreed. He broke the circle. And yet you don't seem upset about it, Peveril concluded, and the voice laughed a chilly laugh that made Peveril's skin crawl. No, I'm not, the voice replied. I knew already that he would break it. At that, Peveril stared into the shadows in his room in confusion. Why? He asked. Because he wasn't born to follow the rules, the voice said, amused. His whole life is a life against the fundamental laws of nature, while at the same time following them to a T. Haven't you noticed already? Peveril hadn't, but then, as good as he knew Salvus Aha, he didn't know him as good as the voice in the shadows, because unlike the voice, he hadn't been there for all of it. Why? He finally asked, confused. Because someone who acts against nature is always drawn to someone who does it as well, the voice replied. That sounded as if Sal's evil, Peveril snorted. Not evil, the voice replied, amused. He balances everything, he always did. The moment evil is about to go on a winning streak, he's there and stops it. He's fundamental for the wizarding world, even more so in the future. And yet he has no idea. No, he hasn't, the voice said. He can't for now, he has to make his final choice first. It's his decision, to live or to die. When he has decided, I will either release him of his duties or finalize our deal. That's the way things have to be. That still doesn't explain why it has to be him, Peveril said, sighing. The answer was a laugh, but no answer was given. No, it doesn't, the voice said. It doesn't at all. Weeks later, Nicholas silently left the room when Salvatia's teacher finally left. Something has changed within your son over the summer, the Salvatia's professor had said. Whatever happened, he isn't the same anymore. And Nicholas couldn't help but feel guilty, since there was just one reason why sweet Salvatio, his parents' pride and joy, had changed. It had been Nicholas's actions that changed the child. Nick? Nicholas turned around and looked at his wife, who looked at him quizzically. Are you all right? Nicholas opened his mouth to lie, but his mouth seemed to have another idea. No, it said, I'm not. Perenelle looked at him in concern. Nick, she said, why are you worried? And for a moment, Nicholas cursed that his wife knew him that well to be able to read him so easily. Then he sighed, looked around to make sure that Catherine and Henry had left and they were alone, and decided to confess. The professor, he said, sighing, he was right. Right with what? Perenelle asked, frowning. Something happened to Salvatio, Nicholas said quietly, and it was my fault. His wife's frown deepened at that. What are you? Do you remember when you and the other were gone while I was home with Salvatio? He asked. The time he was in bed with fever. I do, Perenelle asked, confused. Why do you ask that? I didn't listen, Nicholas confessed, and suddenly tears began to flow. I didn't listen, and now something's wrong with our nephew. Perenelle raised an eyebrow at that. I fear you don't make any sense, she said, still half frowning. I experimented, Nicholas said, letting the tears flow freely. I thought it was safe. The formula was sound and I didn't see any risk in brewing the potion. Perenelle's brow furrowed in confusion. I don't see where you're going with this, Nick, she said. I know you. If you think that a formula is sound, then normally there's just a minimal risk involved. But I was wrong this time around, Nicholas interrupted her heatedly. I was wrong. And yet I don't see how that could have changed, Sal. The potion blew up and I nearly died, Nicholas replied in a rushed way. I was wrong. My formula wasn't as sound as I thought and the potion blew up and nearly killed me. And yet you were whole and healthy when we came back, Perenelle reminded him. Did you hit your head, Nick? Yes, Nicholas said. Then he shook his head. I mean, no, I didn't hit my head, but yes, I was fully healed when you returned. It was Salvatore who did it. Perenelle's eyes narrowed at that. What do you mean, it was Salvatore who did it? She asked coolly. Nicholas just shrugged helplessly. I don't actually understand what happened, he replied. The potion blew up. I was dying. Salvatore came in and found me, and then there's nothing. I woke up fully healed with a crying child in my lap in the middle of some kind of ritual, a healing ritual, Salvatore called it. This time he saw his wife's confusion in her eyes. I don't know where he learned it, Nicholas said quietly. But he basically confessed that he knew how to do a ritual, a healing ritual, he said. He also told me that it wasn't enough. Nicholas trailed off and shook his head. It doesn't matter, he said. The only thing that matters is that it was my fault that he changed. He wouldn't have changed if I wouldn't have been so stupid and decided to brew even after you warned me not to do it. He would still be the same sweet child if I hadn't, even if you were at fault, Perenelle said. Even whatever you said has truly happened, and I'm not yet convinced that it did, and that you didn't solely hit your head and dreamed it. There's still the possibility that it wasn't you who changed him. Nicholas just shook his head. Something happened that night, he said. I'm not sure what, but I know that something happened. He was different after that night. I thought he was traumatized. I tried to talk to him about it, but he refused. But if they also noticed at school, then there has to have been more than just shock to it. Yes, he saved my life. Yes, it must have been a shock to him to find me dying. But I survived, and yet he didn't return to the child we knew. Instead, it seemed to have gotten worse. Whatever happened that night, it was more than just finding me half dead and healing me, and it is my fault that it happened. Perenelle sighed at that. Nicholas, she said slowly, but Nicholas just shook his head. I know it, Perenelle, he said, his eyes grave. Don't even try to tell me different. For a moment his wife seemed to want to argue against him, but in the end she just inclined her head. I will not argue with you for now, she said. We will ask Salvatore to return for you. We will talk to him then. If you're right, then we will know, and we will help him to overcome whatever else happened that night, all right, Cherry? For a moment, Nicholas wanted to argue, but then he sighed and gave in as well. He nodded. Come Yule, they would know what exactly happened that night. Nicholas nearly died. It was weeks later when Peveril got a visit he had hoped to never get. Peveril! The voice of an angry vampire echoed through the halls, waking Peveril's descendants. It was Peveril's restricting hand that stopped his many times grandson to head down and meet the threat head-on. Don't, he said. He came for me. Grandfather, the younger man started to say, but Peveril shushed him. It was I who did something, so it will be I who has to accept the consequences. Don't worry, he's not here to kill someone. I think. His grandson looked at him in concern, but Peveril just smiled at him before heading down the stairs himself. In the foyer stood Anastasius Sanguini, looking like he was about to breathe fire in fury. Anna, Peveril greeted the vampire. Don't Anna me, Father Abductor, the vampire seethed. 13 years. I thought him dead for 13 years. And it was for the better, Peveril replied coolly. Sal wasn't in any condition to continue like before. That doesn't mean you can simply kidnap him. Anastasius roared. It was either that or watching him die by his own hands. Peveril replied, sighing. I couldn't let you come anywhere near him while he was a child. Why? Do you think I would have bitten him? The vampire cried indignantly. I wouldn't, which I know quite well, Peveril said. But you were part of his old life, a life that he couldn't remember as long as... You made him forget? The vampire screeched. How could you do that? As long as nobody he knew would meet him. If I had known that his parents decided to let him attend Hogwarts, I would have stopped them, since the risk of meeting someone he knew and breaking the seal on his memories was far greater. There, you sealed his memories? The vampire shouted. Do you know what consequences? I know, Peveril interrupted the vampire heatedly. Don't you dare to accuse me of not taking in account the changes that would happen to his character if he was sealed away. But it was the only way I could help him. I refused to let him die, and... Shouldn't you have let him die? The vampire sneered. Isn't that a law of the immortal Firbolg? If one of them decides to die, you can't stop him and some such? Peveril's eyes narrowed at that. It is, he said. It was an agreement between those that are counted to the immortal, the basilisks, the phoenixes, the dementors, the elder dragons, the thunderbirds, the high elves and the unicorns. Not that I truly understand how those purebloods can be counted to the immortal, considering that the most of them might live long, but not forever. If you know about it, then why? Why not? Peveril said, amused. Anastasia's eyes narrowed even more. You're a Firbolg-born like my father, he said. Every Firbolg knows about the agreement, if they're part in it or not, and every Firbolg follows the agreement, so you shouldn't have done it. Nobody would. Peveril shrugged. The agreement doesn't matter, he said. I broke it, and I don't regret it at all. Anastasius looked at him in surprise. I'm not sure what to think about that, he finally settled on. Peveril laughed. Unlike other purebloods, I do have some rights that they don't have, he said. Not one of the others would argue with my decision if they knew that I decided it. Anastasius frowned. I don't think I understand, he said, and Peveril smiled. I knew you wouldn't, he replied, waving it off as if it wasn't important. I'm not about to show you for now. Peveril had no interest in confessing the most important secret he had kept since long before he had met Salvazar. The secret wasn't for the vampire's ears to hear, and the one who should hear the confession wouldn't be able to accept it now. Peveril knew that his confession would have to wait for long since, after his death, he could hint at it. He would hint at it, but he wouldn't confess. Still, if someone would draw the right conclusion out of his words, well, that wasn't his fault, was it? His eyes fell on the shadow hidden in the entrance of his home, lingering in the still open door, watching them with unreadable eyes. Anastasius hadn't seen it yet. The vampire's eyes again narrowed at Peveril's words. You'll not show me? He repeated darkly. You're telling me that you broke an agreement that's older than my entire race. Gods! It's older than humanity, and you refuse to show me why you, a baby in the eyes of everybody who's part of the agreement, thinks that he's above it? Truly, do you truly think that a little child like you has any right to even think about breaking something that's so fundamental for our world? I told you I don't care, and I definitely don't regret it, Peveril said softly. And I don't think that you truly regret that I broke the agreement. That's not the point, Anastasius roared. It was my father's decision. My great-grandparents stopped me when I tried to interfere. If I, as his son, am not allowed to interfere, who are you to think that you are allowed to do just that? Who are you that you think you're above the law? I told you I won't. I don't care if you don't want to tell me. If I have to, I will force you to. Anastasius was never able to end his threat. Anastasius Arthur Lucidarius Sanguini. A voice interrupted the vampire sternly. It was the shadowed figure in Peveril's doorway. The vampire flinched and turned hurriedly. His eyes flickered over the shadow's face and body, reading the annoyed body language of his opponent. Pater, he said, sounding more like a scolded child than a grown adult, for just a moment before catching himself and returning to his adult behavior. What are you doing here, Pater? Peveril again looked over Anastasius' shoulder just to see 13-year-old Salvatio Malfoy standing in his door, a phoenix on his shoulder. He was looking at Anastasius sternly. Grandfather brought me when we found out that you were out and about to find out about my condition, Sal said coolly. Anastasius gawked at that. But, you should be at Hogwarts, he exclaimed. I should, Sal said coolly, and so should you. Instead, you are dandling across half of Europe, first to visit my parents just to inquire about me, your student, and then you go searching for a man who should have been dead for centuries already. Well, you were behaving oddly, so why go and search out my parents instead of confronting me? Because Anastasius actually had no explanation for that. I was scared. I feared that I was wrong, and you still should have talked to me first, Sal interrupted him, sighing. Really, child? Sometimes I wonder how someone like me managed to raise a Gryffindor-like person like you. Only a Gryffindor would go out to confront the parents instead of the child, and then go searching for someone who should be dead. But I knew he wasn't. That doesn't matter, Sal exclaimed. You're a teacher at Hogwarts. You've accepted the responsibility for the education of your students. Dilly-dallying across the country definitely doesn't concur with your responsibility as a teacher. So, tell me again, what are you doing here? Anastasius frowned at that. I'm looking into the well-being of one of my students, he replied. That might have been the case in France, Sal countered. But you already knew that I was well when you came here, so I ask again, what are you doing here? Anastasius pouted. I'm researching what happened to my father, he replied childishly. I needed to know. You might have needed to know for your own sake of mind, Sal replied, but you could have gone and looked into it at the weekend. So again, what are you doing here? Anastasius shrunk into himself. Confronting the man who took away my father, he finally asked meekly. Sal sighed. Gryffindors, he said, rolling his eyes. Truly, Anna, confronting a man who was able to not only de-age me to a child, but also took away my memory. Don't you think that confronting someone like that could have had dire consequences? But we're talking about Peverell, Anastasius said, confused. I lived with him for a while. He isn't dangerous. Sal gave his son the gimlet eye. Peverell fried a whole fortress with lightning. He was one of the reasons why Hogwarts came to be and stood up to the gathering of lords without consequences for him. He de-aged a 2,000-year-old furbolg and made him lose his memory. He did all that without breaking a sweat, and you tell me he's not dangerous? Anastasius opened his mouth to answer. Think about it, child, Sal hissed, and Anastasius closed his mouth again. A contemplative look crossed the vampire's features. Well, if you put it like that, Anastasius pouted and Sal rolled his eyes. Yes, I put it like that, he said. Truly, Anna, what were you thinking? Peverell might have come across as nice and harmless, but if you look at his deeds in the past, you would have long seen that he's definitely anything but that. Just looking at him, living for hundreds of years without any kind of magical help, should have told you about his power. Only a first-generation, Firbolg-born of at least one of the immortal can live for that long, and no Firbolg-born of their descendant has ever been harmless. Anastasius frowned. But you are harmless, he said, confused. Sal stared at him in disbelief. Somehow his son reminded him of this very old memory of a gamekeeper at Hogwarts and a dragon's egg. Sal hadn't thought about that man in a while, but the resemblance, he shook his head. I truly have to go over the whole dangerous and not dangerous thing with you, do I, Anastasius? He sighed. Anastasius blinked at that, his eyes widening when he finally realized something else. So you do remember me, he exclaimed, surprised. Sal rolled his eyes. In the last few minutes I talked to you about the past, spoke about your character, and believe me when I tell you that this part isn't widely known to everybody. I used your full name, Anna, he said, amused. I thought that at least the full name was an indicator that I remember you, considering that you hate your full name and normally don't use it at all. Peverell snorted, amused, while Anastasius pouted. You didn't act as if you were remembering me when I left Hogwarts, he said, still pouting. The answer was a sigh. I was still absorbing my memories back then, Sal replied. I wasn't quite sure what I was remembering, so I didn't say anything. But you do remember now? Peverell asked, sighing, and Sal's green eyes met his own brown ones. Peverell shivered at that coolness in those eyes. I do, Peverell, he said, ice in his voice before it warmed slightly. Thank you, Peverell. Peverell raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure. You and I both know that I would have killed myself if you hadn't stopped me, Sal said. I know, Peverell sighed, but I definitely didn't think you would thank me for my actions. The answer was a half-sad smile. I forgot that there's still something I need to do sometime in the future, Sal replied, sighing. My time as a child and my returning memories reminded me of that. I forgot that I can't die without doing at least that. Peverell frowned at that, confused. Doing what? He asked, and Sal smiled. Sending myself home to H.E., he said. That is one thing I cannot do. When Peveril still looked confused, Sal just patted his hand with a smile. "Don't worry," he said. "That's something I've never told you. Just know that I won't try again. I remember what's important now, and I think I will be able to live as long as I remember why I need to continue living." "That doesn't sound as if you like living," Peveril frowned. The answer was another half-sad smile. "I don't," Sal replied. "I have seen too much, done too much to like it anymore, but at the same time I don't mind it anymore." Peveril sighed. "What will you tell your family?" he asked finally. Sal looked quite uncomfortable at that. "I'm not sure," he said. "I don't like lying to them, but I also don't want my parents to lose their child, even if they already lost it somehow. The moment I started to remember, they're still my parents because I remember being raised by them and part of me loves them like that, but at the same time they're children in my eyes now. I'm not sure how to cope with that." Peveril grimaced. "In the end it's your decision," he said. "Either you return to them and accept them as the parents they were to you for the last 13 years, or you return to your old life and refuse to ever return to them from now on." Sal grimaced and sighed. "I can't simply leave them," he said. "The part of me that was the child raised by them would never forgive myself if I simply left them. At the same time, I won't be able to be the same child I was, now that I remember." For a moment, silence reigned. "I can come with you and tell them that you came into your inheritance early," Peveril finally suggested. "They don't know a lot about purebloods, and they think that you are one. We can explain the changes like that. If you want to, you can even explain your memories like that. They always knew that you weren't a normal magical and they accepted you anyway. I'm quite sure that they'll accept you even with your memories and changed behavior." At those words, the phoenix on Sal's shoulder flew down to the floor and changed into a red-haired man with fiery eyes. "That is the least you can do," Forex said. "You were the one who broke our law after all and brought Salvazar as a child to his current family." Anastasius groaned. "Not that again," he mumbled. "Peveril and I just talked about that shortly before you came." Sal looked at Anastasius in surprise, but Forex ignored his great-grandchild's exclamation and instead started at Peveril Esserly. Peveril's eyes lit up like lightning at that. "Not my law," he said. "I'm not bound by it. Every furbolg, immortal or not, is bound by that law," Forex countered. "We don't have many laws, but this one is unbreakable. Nobody, absolute nobody, has the right to even think about interfering in this law." "Like I said," Peveril countered darkly, "I don't care. I am not bound by it. No furbolg is an exception." Forex replied icily. The answer was a sneer. "That's what the Thunderbird's part of my soul tells me," Peveril replied coolly. "But it's not this part in me that refuses. If you're part Thunderbird, part of the immortal, then you're even more bound by it," Forex hissed angrily. Peveril flexed his teeth. It was an utterly feral gesture and made Anastasia's skin crawl. The phoenix, to Anastasius and his own surprise, stepped one step backwards. "I am not bound by that law," Peveril repeated, before he added nearly silently, "My actions are bound by far worse than a simple law." His eyes and the eyes of the phoenix met, and the phoenix shivered at that. Something passed between the immortal phoenix and the 700-year-old pureblood. The phoenix was the first to look away. "I see," Forex finally said nearly silently. "You're the first Grimm's child." Peveril grimaced at that. "I am," he said. "It wasn't my choice." The phoenix laughed at that. "Definitely not," he said. "I am one of the few truly immortal furbolg, and even I prefer my fate to yours." Peveril waved it off. "It's not I who suffers because of his relation to the first Grimm," he said. "My father suffered for thousands of years, but unlike him, neither myself nor my sister were born a true Grimm, hence I'm not born to suffer like my father." Anastasius and Sal looked at him in confusion, but Forex nodded. "I remember your father," Forex said. "I heard he was finally granted his end some 100 years ago." The phoenix looked at the pureblood in front of him thoughtfully. "I would have sworn that he was granted his end just decades after your birth," Forex added. Peveril inclined his head. "He already had a living heir back then. His heir back then had already been slowly taking over my father's duties for about 1,000 years. But duties like his can be a heavy burden, and two of them managing them was a lot easier than just one of them doing them. My father would have prevailed for at least another 1,000 years if I hadn't offered to share the duty with his successor for him. What kind of duties are you talking about, Peverell? Sal asked with narrowed eyes. Peverell looked at the man-turned-child and grimaced again. Let's just say that the first one who ever wielded the Deathly Hallows rightfully was my father, he said. Sal's eyes widened at that. Did he like Medrode? Medrode didn't wield those powers rightfully, Petrel answered, sighing. There aren't a lot of people who have the strength to wield them without succumbing to their thrall. My father could, and since he could give them up long before I was even born. Give them up? Sal repeated, surprised. The final and the first deed of those who can truly wield their powers, Peverell answered, sighing. I am sorry, Salvaseha. Sal frowned at that. It wasn't you who gave them up, he said, confused. No, but if it weren't for my grandfather and father, they wouldn't even exist, Peverell replied. My father gave them up about 2,000 years ago. If he hadn't, Medrad would have never found them and never succumbed to them. You wouldn't have to bury your brother, so he wouldn't have done the Horcrux without the Deathly Hallows? Sal questioned bitterly. Peverell winced. No, he said. The decision for the Horcrux has nothing to do with the Deathly Hallows. In other words, it wouldn't have changed a thing, Sal replied bitterly. Peverell opened his mouth to object, but in the end he couldn't. I fear you are right, he finally said tiredly. There's a huge chance that it wouldn't have changed anything in the end, except that he would have died that day you used your eyes on him and not ended up as stone. Sal raised his eyebrow at that, but before he could ask, Peverell continued with the explanation. Sal would have asked for. A Horcrux binds the soul to the living world, Peverell said. But it doesn't bind the soul to its body. The Hallows, on the other hand, bind the soul to the body, and not just to the living world. Your brother's body would have died that day if he hadn't been the master of the Deathly Hallows. Sal said nothing for a moment or two after that confession. In the end he just sighed. I guess it was better like that, he said. At least he couldn't wreak havoc as a wraith while I was looking for his Horcrux. Peverell smiled at the immortal boy in front of him. It was great to see that Sal had healed enough to be able to deal with his deed without feeling too guilty about it. Oh, Peverell could still see and hear the hurt and self-hatred in Sal's face and voice, but he also could see the slow acceptance that was muffling the guilt. Sal wasn't all right, but he would be in time.
Off.
It was the day before Yule, when the front step of Malfour Mansion was again occupied by a man who actually didn't belong to the Malfour family. This time it was Nicholas who opened the door, feeling like a déjà vu was about to happen. The old man in front of the door looked the same like 13 years ago. Nicholas frowned when he saw the man. I thought you would come back in 2 years and not now, he said, and the old man sighed. I planned to, he said, but something changed, so I am here now. Nicholas's gaze darkened at that, but he stepped aside nevertheless. Catherine and Henri won't let you take the child if that's what you came to do, he told the old man. The man just sighed. Don't worry, he said. I didn't come to take away the child. Nicholas frowned, but nodded, before leading the old man to the sitting room, where Catherine, Henri and Perenelle were conversing and reading. Salvatio had secluded himself to his room the moment he had returned home yesterday night. He hadn't shown himself all day. Who was at the door, Cherry? Perenelle asked, looking up from her scrolls. Her breathing hitched when she recognized the old man behind her husband. You, she said, and Catherine and Henri turned at her fearful expression. Catherine's eyes widened when she recognized the man. Ah, she gulped, before forcing the words out of her mouth. Are you here for Salvicio? The old man sighed at that. May I take a seat? He asked, and when the two women reluctantly nodded, he sat in one of the leftover seats before continuing. Yes, I am here for Salvatio, he said. Something happened this summer. Nicholas paled at that. So it was my fault, he asked with guilt-ridden eyes. He had confessed what happened to his brother and sister-in-law after he had talked about it with Perenelle. He thought that he should at least tell Salviati's parents what he had recklessly done and how it had changed their beloved son. Your fault? The old man frowned. I was dying and he healed me, Nicholas confessed. He was different after that. The old man frowned. So that's how it happened, he said. I was notified when it happened, but I didn't know how it happened. Nicholas closed his eyes at that. So it was my fault, he said, defeated. If I hadn't been, whatever happened to Salvatio wouldn't have happened. The answer was a sigh. May I ask what you allude to when you talk about whatever happened to him? The old man asked. What did you notice changing? Nicholas bit his lips at that before looking at his wife and the rest of the family. He was more withdrawn, Catherine said slowly. At that point of time, I still had no idea that something had happened because someone didn't tell me about the accident. She sent Nicholas a dark look, and Nicholas looked away. Neither Catherine nor Henri had been happy with him when they finally found out. They hadn't blamed him for the accident, but they blamed him for not telling them sooner. He was a little bit more cautious, Henri added. And his vampire teacher came by because Salvatio started acting different towards him. I don't know how he acted different, because the teacher never said, I just know that he did. Nicholas also noticed that Salvatio's tears gained phoenix-like abilities. Perenelle added, or at least we never noticed it if they had before. Not that Salvatio cried much even as a babe. The old man nodded at that. What about knowledge? He asked, and Nicholas frowned. Are you talking about the ritual he used to heal me? He asked and was surprised when the old man nodded. This would do, the old man said. Nicholas' eyes narrowed. Why did you ask us about those changes? He questioned wearily. To his surprise, the answer didn't come from the man in front of him but from a child's voice at the door. Because he wanted to know if I truly woke up. The child's voice said, and Nicholas as well as the others turned to look at Salvatio, who stood at the entrance to the door warily. Salvatio, the old man greeted the child. Peverell, the child replied as if greeting an old friend. Nicholas's eyes narrowed. You know him, Salvatio? He asked cautiously. I remember him bringing me to you, Salvatio replied. It's a little bit blurry as if it was a dream, but I remember him nevertheless. He never told us his name back then, Nicholas said, frowning, and Salvatio just shrugged. I know, the child replied, but I remember everything before I met you as well, even looking at my birth parents for the first time, and also looking at them for the last time. Peverell grimaced at that. Perenelle on the other side frowned. He didn't remember before, she said before turning to Peverell. What happened? The old man sighed. I know I promised you 15 years before his heritage would make itself known, but at that he was interrupted by Nicholas when Nicholas finally understood what had happened back when he had nearly died. His heritage, he said in dawning realization. When he tried to rescue me, it awakened his pure blood heritage. It was Salvatio who answered. It did, the child said. I'm sorry, Uncle Nick. Nicholas just shook his head. It isn't you who should be sorry, he said, feeling angry with himself. It is I. I was the one who was stupid enough to experiment with nobody in the house to help me if something happened. I was the one who basically forced you to grow up faster than you should, just because I was too stupid to keep myself safe. Salvatio just shook his head. I could have let you die, Uncle, the child said. It was my decision, and I don't regret it. Nicholas opened his mouth to object, but the old man who had been called Peverell by Salvatio intercepted him before he could even utter one word. You don't have to worry about Salvatio, he said. Awaking early hasn't done him any harm. The child raised an eyebrow at that, but didn't object. So, Perenelle said cautiously, what does happen now that Salvatio truly is a pure blood? To Nicholas' surprise, the old man looked at Salvatio with a questioning look instead of answering immediately. Salvatio hesitated. Then he sighed. I won't leave or anything if you don't want me to, he said, but I'm not the child you know anymore as well. Salvatio looked at his parents and aunt and uncle with shadowed eyes. I can't be the innocent child I was before this summer ever again, he said. If you can't accept that, I will leave, because I won't act and lie to you like that. I grew up loving you as my parents. I won't defile this relationship by trying to lie to you about my character and decisions. Salvatio is a phoenix-born, Peveril said, sighing. His heritage doesn't just involve abilities, it also involves memories. Like the ritual he used to heal me, Nicholas concluded. Salvatio inclined his head. Yes, he said. But not just that. I've gained about 2,000 years' worth of memories. I'm not a child anymore. At that, Catherine pressed her fist to her mouth to stifle a sob. It was Henry who asked the question. They all wanted to ask, does that mean we aren't your parents anymore? Henry's voice was soft, full of grief and yet accepting in a way Nicholas wasn't sure he himself could have ever been. The conflict on Salvatio's face was heartbreaking, and at the same time so hope-inducing. It looked as if two parts in him were ringing with each other. One part, so Nicholas guessed, the memories the child gained, and one part the child they raised. It was heartening to see that the child hadn't stopped loving them even with the memories he gained. Obviously Catherine could see it as well, because she stumbled to her feet to run over to her child. She fell to her knees in front of it and embraced it, burying her tear-stained face into her child's shoulder. For a moment Salvatio looked uncomfortable, but in the end he hesitatingly reached out and embraced his mother, and his mother she was, at least in Nicholas's eyes. Like I said before, Salvatio said, his voice laced with longing and tears. I won't leave if you don't want me to. Just don't expect me to be the same. At that, Henry smiled tearfully before standing up and joining his son and wife at the door. We won't, Salvatio, he said. As long as you don't expect us to always remember that you now feel a lot older than you are, we at least try to remember that you suddenly gained enough knowledge to make us children in your eyes. Salvatio grimaced at that. I definitely didn't need that mental image, he complained, and his parents laughed. Sorry, mon fils, Henri replied before hesitating. Is it still all right with you to call you that? Salvatio sighed. You raised me for 13 years, Papa, he said. Even if I have the memories of 2,000 years, it doesn't change the fact that habits from my time growing up with you had time to fester. I'm quite sure that even I am hard-pressed to stop calling you my parents, even if I remember hundreds of years living without you. The answer was a smile from Catherine. Don't even try to stop, Catherine said. Believe me, even if you would have turned out a 5,000-years-old vampire with memory loss, we raised you, so you are still our son. At that, Salvatio blinked in surprise before exchanging a glance with Peveril. No, Peveril said, amused, he's definitely not 5,000 years old, and believe me, you would have long since noticed if he were a vampire. Salvatio snorted at that. Sometimes I wonder about you, Peveril, he said. How, by the gods, did you find those people for me as parents? I somehow have the feeling you intend to drown me in Gryffindors. Peveril looked at the child innocently. They're from Beauxbaton, he replied. I had no idea what house they would have been in at Hogwarts. Salvatio just raised an eyebrow. You sure? He asked, and Peveril shrugged. Well, I followed Godric's line, since I know of the relation between your mother and them, Peveril replied. I'm not at fault for the rest of all this. Nicholas frowned at that. What do you mean you followed Godric's line? He asked suspiciously. The old man sighed. I planned to give Salvatio to a relation of his, he said, since, like you know, I'm quite old and because of that weary to raise a child all alone. I knew that he was related to Godric Gryffindor, the founder of Hogwarts, so I searched for Godric's heirs. And you came to me, Nicholas said, suddenly understanding in his eyes. You know my true last name. For a moment Peveril hesitated. Catherine, Henri and Salvatio looked at Nicholas interestedly. What do you mean your true last name? Catherine asked, and Nicholas grimaced. You know that my family left Britain when I was a child of 10, don't you? Catherine and Henri nodded. When I was accepted at Beauxbaton, I changed my last name to Flame to obscure my heritage. Perenelle knows, but we never told our children or anybody else, Nicholas said, sighing. At that, Henry frowned. You obscured your last name? He asked. Nicholas sighed. My last name isn't one you can bear easily, he replied, sighing. It's a name shadowed in history and darkness. I grew up with it for 10 years, and I was vilified long before I was even old enough to have a wand. I didn't want the same for my children, so I begged my parents to change my name when I was added to Beauxbaton as a student. Henry frowned. Vilified? He asked. Nicholas grimaced. The name Lefay normally always makes sure that you're vilified by only having that name, he replied. I'm not surprised that Godric Gryffindor gave up his name when founding Hogwarts. Peveril snorted. Actually, he said, giving up his name was an accident. He was married to my sister Rowena while I was married to his sister Helga. It was simply practical to differentiate between us with the help of nicknames. It would have been confusing otherwise. The other adults stared at Peveril. You were a founder of Hogwarts? Nicholas asked, surprised. Peveril shook his head. No, he said. My wife was. I simply knew them all. Salas snorted. I remember distinctively one very shiny tower belonging to you in Hogwarts, he said, amused. Peveril shrugged at that. I had to live somewhere, he said. Anyway, I wouldn't dare to claim it again. It's inhabited by a nuisance without any sense of rightfulness. Sal raised an eyebrow at that. Sounds as if you're peeved with the sorting hat, he said, amused. Whatever, why? Peveril answered with a disbelieving look towards the child. It put you in Ravenclaw, he said. Sal shrugged. It did, the child said, amused. That doesn't explain why you're peeved. It put you in Ravenclaw, Peveril replied slowly. That thing is either insane or defect. Whatever it is, it's definitely not doing its job right anymore. Sal winked it off. Don't worry, Peveril, he said. If I ever wear it again, I'll promise to try for Hufflepuff. Peveril gawked at him. Hufflepuff, he repeated slowly. You. Salvatio grinned. Why not? He asked. I remember being sorted into Gryffindor once, after all. Peveril shook his head slowly. You know what, Sal? He said. I don't want to know what you've been up to since I last saw you. I like being sane, thank you very much. Sal shrugged, unconcerned. You're not implying that my parents raised me to be insane, do you? He asked, amused, and Nicholas wondered if Peveril knew what memories Salvatio had inherited. It seemed that Peveril at least knew enough about those memories to be able to interact with the child. Peveril at the same time opened his mouth, just to close it again without saying anything. The old man shook his head and then turned to Catherine. There's just one thing you should know about your son if he stays with you, he said. Salvatio won't die, at least not for quite some time. At that, Henry and Catherine exchanged a concerned gaze. What do you mean he won't die? Perenelle asked. Basilisk-born like me lives for a very long time, Salvatore replied for the old man. Just look at Peveril. He lived for 700 years already, and he isn't one of the so-called immortal ones. My own birth father lived for over 1,000 years. At that, Catherine closed her eyes. So I guess you will live that long as well, Henry said, concerned. Sal shrugged. About, he said. My father was killed. He didn't die naturally. Catherine and Henri exchanged a look. Will he age like a human? Henry asked Peveril. Peveril nodded. At least for now he will, Peveril said. He will grow up like any other child, but he's right. He won't die for a very long time. Nicholas's eyes darkened at that. And I won't as well, he said, exchanging a look with Perenelle. I'm working on a philosopher's stone, and I will succeed. I can make sure that we'll be able to look after him until he doesn't need or want us anymore. Peveril frowned at that, but in the end shrugged. You can at least try to find the formula, the old man said. If you don't succeed, so be it. Nicholas gave him the gimlet eye. I will succeed, he growled. It was my fault that Salvatio had to wake up his heritage that early. The least I can do is stay by him while he's forced to wither centuries. Henry and Catherine, on the other hand, exchanged another look. What about children? Catherine asked. Will he be able to have children? Peveril looked at Salvatio. It was the child who answered. No, maman, he said. I can't, not for a long time yet to come. I'm sorry. The answer was a soft smile. It's all right, mon fils, she said. It's enough for me that you will live. I was merely concerned about your future. Your father and I can arrange your marriage like every parent should, but we can't stop your wife from aging a lot faster than you. I just hoped that if you had children there would be at least some other persons you could have in your life for some time to come." Salvatio just smiled at his mother. "It's all right, Maman," he said. "You don't have to fear for me. I'm just 13 right now. Whatever will happen years from now." Catherine smiled at that. "Nevertheless, we should look out for a wife from a long-living family," Henry said. "Your mother and I were already looking. Since in 1 or 2 years it's time for you to engage, knowing that you'll live a lot longer than us, just narrowed down our search pattern a little bit more." Perenelle nodded. "It just means that you finally can reject that pompous man's offer," she said. "He's been after Salvatore since the boy stopped him in cornering you 7 years ago. That damn lord might have a high standing in French society, but it's well known that his family members don't even reach a century, far too short for someone like Salvatore." Nicholas nodded as well. "It also adds some families we didn't consider until now," he said. "Families like the Knots, the Maxims and the Blacks. They're all very powerful politically, but we ruled them out since they've all very prominent pure-blood heritage. Since we didn't know Salvatore's pure-blood heritage and some pure-bloods simply can't with each other, we thought it best not to consider them at all." Peverell raised an eyebrow. "You've been looking for a wife for Salvatore?" he asked, a little bit unsure. Salvatore rolled his eyes. "They're looking since I was 10, he said. "And no, I don't like it at all." Peverell looked at Salvatore confused. The immortal child just rolled his eyes again. No, Sal hadn't thought about the fact that his parents wanted to marry him off. When he decided to return, he hadn't even thought about it in passing until his mother spoke about it again a few minutes ago. For a moment Sal contemplated if he could stop his parents' quest for his wife. It wasn't that Sal objected to a woman in his life. He had lived for centuries, of course he had had all kinds of lovers. Some lovers he stayed with their whole lives. Some he just met for one night. Some were love interests, some friends turned lover, some friends with benefits. There were hundreds of years Sal had gone without lovers. There were other centuries in which he had more than one. There were even some lovers that had been his partners in something akin to marriage. Not that they had truly been married by current standards. Marriage like it was now hadn't existed for the most part of Sal's life, after all. Still, Sal had always chosen his lover himself. In the end, he conceded that it would take time to disabuse his parents of the idea to marry him off. There was no way he would be able to stop them without working on them and his uncle and aunt for some time. But then, Sal was a 2,000-year-old Basilisk-born. Disabusing his current parents from organizing his marriage should be easy for him, shouldn't it? Year 1899. "Are you ready, Eloise?" The unspeakable in front of the casually clothed woman looked at her in concern. He was one of Eloise Mentumble's best friends, and like her he worked in the Department of Mysteries, category time travel. "I am," she said. Of course she was nervous, but they had quite a sound theory regarding time travel into the past, and also a device that would bring her back the moment she would use it. "Do you have everything for documentation?" her best friend asked. "I do," she said. "And the device to bring you back?" She held out an odd-looking device, like a miniature time-turner made out of clay. "And you know how to—" "I just have to break it, Charles," she replied while rolling her eyes. "Believe me, I won't forget." "Good," her best friend said. "And don't you dare to forget." She rolled her eyes again. "I won't, Charles," she said, amused. "I won't." Her best friend nodded and took a deep breath. She snorted at that. "You look like it is you who's going back in time, not I," she commented, amused. "Don't be so nervous, Charles. Nothing will go wrong." Charles shook his head. "I still think that it's a risk you shouldn't take," he said. "Our theory is untested. There's so much that can go wrong." Eloise laughed. "Don't be such a worrywart, Charles," she replied. "You've been against that experiment from the start, and I know that you're just here because you didn't want me to have to work alone." Charles's eyes narrowed at that. "My professor in ancient runes always told me that even if something can be done using runes, it doesn't mean that it should be done," he replied darkly. I think he's right, Eloise. She laughed at that. Professor Malfoy has always been far too cautious for his own good, she replied, amused. Truly, you'd think that a man with his knowledge in ancient runes would use this knowledge to bring new discoveries into our world. Instead, he's at Hogwarts, teaching. Charles just shook his head. Someone has to teach, and you can't say that Professor Malfoy can't do it, he replied. Nevertheless, he's far too cautious, she replied, amused. And now let's get started. I'm ready to have a look at the world in the 1500. Charles just sighed at that. All right, he gave in. But if something goes wrong, please remember that I told you to be careful. Yes, worrywart, she replied, amused, and gestured to the other unspeakables that surrounded them. Give me the time turner. The time turner she was given had a lot more spinning devices attached to it, but all in all it wasn't too different and too much bigger than the normal ones used for going back only hours. The only noticeable difference was that a few of the spirals could be fixed to a specific date before someone started to spin the time turner. She fixed it to the 20th of August, 1400. All right, 1400, here I come, she said, grinning. Everyone else stepped back. For a moment she looked at Charles. I bring back some souvenirs, she said, laughing. Then she sent her time turner spinning. The world blurred. For a moment she could see the people around her doing everything backwards, but then even these actions started to blur until everything she saw was color. A moment or two later the motions around her stopped. The world cleared and she fell to her knees before losing consciousness. Year 1402. When Eloise woke up, a hand was resting on her forehead. Comment cela, Muse? Amix? The voice asked, concerned. The voice was female and quite soft. The answer was as incomprehensible as the first words, but unlike the first words, they were spoken by a man. Eloise groaned and then opened her eyes. She was lying on the ground in the shadows of a tree at the side of a clearing in the middle of hundreds of little daisies. A man was sitting next to her, one of his hands on her forehead, the other feeling her pulse at her wrist. Next to him stood a female in an old-fashioned dress in a light green color. The man looked at her in concern. He had black locks and oddly light green eyes and reminded her of her old ancient runes. Professor, somehow, his face showed his concern. Bist du heil, Donzel? He asked her, and she looked at him confused. I don't understand, she said. It was then that she finally remembered what had happened and where she was. She had used the time turner. She was in the year 1400, if it had gone right, that is. But then she knew that no one, neither witch nor muggle, would wear such old-fashioned clothing anymore, so she dared to think that it truly happened and that she went back in time. And yet she was a little bit confused that she couldn't understand the man and the woman in front of her. She had never anticipated that the language would have changed over time to the one she was speaking now. I'm sorry, I don't understand, she repeated, and the other woman, or girl, since Eloise guessed that she was about 15 years old, looked confused at her companion, a boy of about 17. He said something to the girl with a short smile before turning back to her and letting her go. Then he closed his eyes, his brow furrowing. Could you? He started slowly and heavily accented. Repeat that. Eloise looked at the man in surprise. What language are you and the girl speaking? She finally blurted out, confused. The man frowned again. English, he answered, half amused, half confused. Or French, if you prefer. She frowned. I don't understand a word you're saying, she said, confused. And I'm speaking English. At that she saw amusement dancing in the eyes of the man. Believe me, he said slowly, current English sounds quite different. And yet you're here and talking to me in the English I know, she pointed out. He laughed at that, and when the girl behind him said something with a frown on her face, he turned to her and said something else. Her eyebrows rose at that, then she stared at Eloise in confusion. What? Eloise started to ask, but the man answered before she could even formulate her question. My betrothed isn't quite that happy that I'm laughing with a female that isn't she, he replied, amused. She's quite young still, and a little bit unsure about my affection. Eloise frowned at that. Your betrothed? she repeated, not amused at all. Isn't she a little bit young to be betrothed to anyone? The boy raised an eyebrow at that. This is 1402, ma'am, he replied a little bit coolly. In the mundane world she would have been married for a few years now. Eloise frown deepened. Still, she said, she's far too young. The marriage won't be for another 6 years, he interrupted her. Unlike in later times, you don't marry until both marriage partners are at least 21 years of age. Tell me, when do they marry in your time, miss? Eloise's eyes widened at that. What do you mean, in my time? She stuttered. The boy in front of her just raised an eyebrow. The clothing you're wearing is far too liberal for this time, he replied, amused. You're telling me you're speaking English, and yet the language you're speaking isn't the same that everyone else uses, and you're outraged by a practice that has been like that for hundreds of years now. Eloise looked at the man in front of her in surprise. It was oddly logical when he pointed it out like that. Still, she had to try and dissuade him nevertheless. You are speaking my English as well, she pointed out. He laughed at that, amused. No, he said, not your English, just a form of English that's near enough to the one you're speaking that you're able to understand me without a lot of trouble. Guessing from that, I'd say you're from sometime in the 20th century. Her eyes widened at that. I am not, she said. I'm from 1899. He shrugged. Close enough for me, he replied. She stared at him. How? She asked. How do you know that? Like I said, your clothing, your language. No, she interrupted him. How were you able to guess the time I'm from? The answer was an amused smile. That's not something I share with anyone, he replied. That reminded her. I'm Eloise, she said. Louise Mintumble. He raised an eyebrow at that, but replied anyway. Salvatio Malfoy, he said, and she wondered if he was related to her ancient runes professor, maybe his ancestor. She couldn't even ask him, since she didn't think that the man in front of her would know the answer. But then, she could ask her professor when she returned to the future. Well, Miss Mintumble, he said, and his choice of words reminded her again of her professor. How did you end up here? Eloise frowned. I don't think that there's so much options that lead to me ending up in the past, she said, and he inclined his head. Surely, he said. But there are still some different ways to travel through time. She looked at him in amusement. I don't think there are too many, she said. You can't travel through time without any kind of preparation. The answer was an amused look at her. There are still accidents, he replied. There are enough accidents in every other part of magic. I don't think that time travel is an exception. She rolled her eyes at him. It was planned, she huffed. We set the timer for year 1400. It's 1402, Malfoy replied. She frowned. We might have calculated some things wrongly, she said. But all in all, the entire test succeeded. I traveled in time for years. The man in front of her shook his head in amusement. Then he turned to his fiancée and said something to her. The girl frowned, but after some more words exchanged, she nodded. If you wish, I am willing to harbor you until you have learned the language and found your footing, he said. Eloise frowned at that. I'm not staying for very long, she said. I plan to stay a week and then return to the future. At that, Malfoy's eyes darkened. It's something different to travel back in time than to travel forward, he said, but then he stopped and shook his head. Anyway, you will need a place to stay. I am sure my parents won't mind if you stay with us for now. I'm quite sure we will be able to explain you as a distant relative from the country whose father had to experience London's high society or something like that. She frowned at him, but in the end she nodded. She would need a place to stay at least for the night. She wasn't quite sure what to think about the added part that made her a distant relative, but she guessed that she could live with it for now. Salvatio didn't know what to think about the woman he found lying on the ground while he had been spending his afternoon with his betrothed. Yes, he was betrothed. He hadn't given in without resistance, but in the end his parents had won. But I won't die for centuries, he had protested. I don't need to marry right now. But we won't be there any more in centuries, his mother replied. We can't forego our duty for our child, just because our child will live longer than most other children. but she will die long before I'm even going to find a grey hair in my hair. Sal protested, and his mother smothered down his black hair fondly. I know, mon petit-fils, she said, smiling sadly, but it is our duty to ensure your future, and a good marriage is the only way to ensure your future. Your father and I wouldn't be able to look your birth parents in the eye if we didn't ensure that you were married before we leave this world for the Vale. My man, Sal protested, there's no way that I'm able to have children. What should I tell my wife? She and maybe everyone will think that it's her fault. She will be an outcast in society just because of me. I'm quite sure your Uncle Nick will help you like he helped your father and me, she said. The moment he's done with his new project, that is. She rolled her eyes. Salvatio sighed at that. His Uncle Nick had been obsessed with making a philosopher's stone since the incident that woke Sal's inheritance early. He hadn't truly succeeded yet, but he had found a way to at least slow down his and his wife's aging. Sal was sure that his uncle would succeed soon. After all, the man had to if he was still alive in Sal's first year at Hogwarts. I'm not forcing a young girl into feeling unable to fulfill her role in life, Maman, he objected his mother's words. I'll talk to her before writing out the contract, she promised. She will go into this marriage knowing that it isn't her fault. Maman! Sadly enough, Sal knew that his mother wouldn't give up on her idea, no matter how much he pleaded and argued. Maybe he should have vanished without a trace when he still had the chance to do so. Now, 5 years later, Sal was engaged for a few months already. His future wife knew that he wouldn't be able to give her children and had accepted her fate. Sal didn't love the girl he was to marry in another 6 years, but he was sure that he could live with her. She, on the other hand, seemed to have a little crush on him. Sal guessed that it was her right to feel that way, so he didn't even try to rid her of her current feelings. It was, after all, a lot better than mutual hatred. Still, it wasn't easy, especially since she clearly was a little bit jealous when they met Eloise Mintumble, and he, unlike his betrothed, was able to understand her. Miozamix, his betrothed, said in that moment. He looked down into her face. He had been guiding her and Eloise to the carriage that would bring his betrothed home and Eloise and him to his parents. Donzal Andromeda? He asked. She hesitated, then sighed. Why do we take her with us, Miozamix? She asked, concerned. Because she doesn't have anyone in this world, and it is our duty as fellow sorcerers to ensure that she finds her place in a world that is foreign to her, he replied. Andromeda, his betrothed, frowned. She's long since past childhood, she said darkly. She should have long since learned her place in this world. Sal smiled at that, amused. She definitely has, in her own time, he replied, not interested in censoring himself. At that, Andromeda looked at him in surprise. Her time? Sal inclined his head. I'd prefer if you don't tell that piece of knowledge to anyone, he said. If this isn't her time, how did she get here? She asked, confused. There are different ways to walk through time, Sal answered without hesitation. However she got here, she will have to stay, and she will need a place to stay. For a moment Andromeda looked at him frowning, but then she nodded. So you'll bring her to your parents to teach her? She asked. He inclined his head. It would be best if we don't spread her origin further than we have to, he replied. She has to learn, but telling everybody her origin won't help her. Andromeda frowned at that, thinking it over, but in the end she nodded. I won't tell anyone, she said, and he smiled at her. Thank you, Domzil. He helped both women into the carriage and then nodded to their driver and guard that they were ready to return home. They went to Andromeda's home, a manor in the middle of London. First, he guided her into the house, greeted her parents, and then said his goodbyes for that day. Then he returned to the carriage and they continued on to his parents' home in London. Is this what you truly want to do, Peverell? The voice asked him softly. Peverell closed his eyes. If I don't do it, he said, Salvatio might break again. I have kept myself away, but since he found out about me, he has come and visited me far too often to not be affected by my death anymore. And yet he might still suffer the moment you breathe your last breath, the voice replied. Peverell inclined his head tiredly. He might, he said, But at least he will keep 2 more with him throughout the centuries. If I don't do it, he will lose me anyway in a year's time. He will lose me, then his parents, his uncle, and his aunt. There's nothing he can do about it, except of grieve our deaths. But if I do it, there will be 2 more he can go to. 2 more who will understand his pain and who will help him to overcome it. He won't try to kill himself if it means to leave someone who needs him alone to suffer. But they won't need him, the voice said softly. In his eyes they will, Peveril replied. They will be new to their immortal life. He will know that they will be forced to grieve for his parents like he will be forced to grieve for them. They will be forced to grieve for their children, children's children and friends. He has gone through all that before. He wouldn't let them suffer alone. So you have decided, the voice said. I have, Peveril said. Will you fault me for my decision, master? The answer was the wind ruffling Peveril's hair. Never, my child, the voice replied warmly. I have always known that Nicholas won't be one of mine for quite some time yet. Again, wind ruffled Peveril's hair. Thank you, my child. I will have my balance for the next centuries, a balance who will do what he has to do without breaking apart by guilt and grief. Then I won't regret my decision, Peveril said, closing his eyes again. I won't regret my death when it means that Sal won't lose everyone he holds dear again. Eloise wasn't sure what to think about Salvatio Malfoy. The young man didn't ask her any questions about the future. He didn't even seem interested in her original time. She watched him guide his betrothed to the door and after vanishing into the house for a few moments, returning to the carriage. The rest of the drive was silent until they stopped in front of another manor. My parents' home, he told her in his stilted English. Let's go in there, Dunzel. I will have to tell them who you are and why you are here. So you're telling them about my time travel? She asked, frowning. It's the only way to ensure that they know why they have to be lenient with your actions and words. You're not from this time. This time is different and I don't plan to try to explain your mistakes away until you get a grip of the current culture, Dunzel. He replied coolly before stepping out of the carriage and holding out a hand for her to take. She frowned at him but took the hand. The rest of the evening was odd, in Eloise's opinion. Salvatio Malfoy and his family were speaking French. Well, at least Salvatio had told her that it was French, because it sure didn't sound like it. And Eloise was sitting next to them understanding nearly nothing. It wasn't the family's fault. They had tried to include her by switching to Latin. Sadly enough, Eloise had never applied herself in her Latin studies, and because of that only knew enough for her spells. It wasn't ideal at all. In the end, the family talked with each other and Eloise was sitting by, listening to the odd language, noting down the differences in culture and language for her documentation. As far as she was able to catch those differences, that is, and listen to the family members talk. Sometimes Salvatio would turn around and talk to her, asking her a question or two, but all in all she felt oddly isolated from those people around her. Salvatio, meanwhile, had some other trouble to work, though. He had told his family that the woman he brought home was from the future, but that brought another round of questions forward. How do you know that she's from the future, mon fils? His father asked. Sal sighed. It's her language and her bearing that made me guess at first. She confirmed it in the end, he replied truthfully. But how can you understand her when she's from the future, mon fils? His mother asked, confused. At that Sal grimaced. That's a long explanation, he said, sighing. Let's just say that it has something to do with my inheritance, all right, maman? If I'd tell you the full version, it would take days until I had it explained fully, and even then I'm not sure if I'd told you everything, especially because I don't know the absolute answer to your question myself. His parents looked at each other, then nodded. All right, mon fils, his father said. Now back to the topic. You can tell that she's from the future. And you're absolutely sure about that, aren't you? Sal inclined his head. I am, père, he said. So will she return to her future soon, or is she here for good? His father asked. Sal frowned at that. For her safety. I hope she's here for good, he replied darkly. Traveling to the future is just possible in one way, to live day for day until you reach the future again. Sal's mother looked at him in surprise at that. You are sure about that? She asked. Sal hesitated, then he sighed and shook his head. There are other ways, he said. There are always other ways, but just because you can theoretically do it doesn't mean that you should. There are dire consequences if you go against nature, Maman. So she will stay, his father concluded, and then nodded. I guess you will teach her our language? Sal inclined his head. Our language, our customs and our way of life, he replied sincerely. His parents nodded at that. What will happen when we return to France next month? Catherine asked. We're not here in London to stay, after all. We only came for your betrothal to Andromeda Black. I guess she will have to choose. Sal replied truthfully. Either she will come with us, or we will find her a place to stay here in London. Or we stay until she's ready to move with us? Sal's father Henry said, sighing. Staying a little bit longer here in London won't be too much of a trouble after all. The answer was a smile from Catherine. Sal just snorted. You just want to stay to have an eye on me and my betrothed, he said, half amused, half exasperated. That's the same reason why you two are still here, months after my betrothal. The answer was an innocent smile from his mother. Oh, Cherry, she said. Surely we aren't that curious. Sal rolled his eyes. Surely not, Maman, he said, amused. Surely not. The rest of the evening they used to talk about and with the new inhabitant of their home. Eloise didn't seem too interested in joining the conversation. Instead of trying to learn their language, and Sal tried to get her start learning, she sat there and listened or wrote something down into a little booklet that she had been carrying with her. She's not even trying to start learning our language, Henry said, frowning. Sal sighed. I'll talk to her later, he promised. I'll try to get her to understand. And with that they started to talk about something else. Nicholas looked up from his cauldron. At the door stood Peverell, looking at him with dark eyes. I see that you're still working on your concoction, he said, frowning, looking at Nicholas's experiments all over the room. I will succeed, Nicholas said stubbornly. I won't give up until I do. And yet you haven't made any progress to gain a philosopher's stone in years now, Peverell said, looking around the room darkly. Nicholas returned the look of the other man stubbornly. I will succeed, he repeated icily. I won't leave Salvatio all alone for years and years. He's my nephew, and it was my fault that his childhood was cut short. He gave up his childhood in exchange for my life, so I will find a way to live until he's ready to be alone. So you're quite positive that you will succeed, Peverell said, sighing. Nicholas shrugged. It doesn't matter what you think. I will succeed, he said coolly. Whatever you say, I won't let my nephew face all those centuries all alone. For a moment Peverell said nothing. Then he sighed. You're a stubborn man, Nicholas, Peverell said tiredly. He shook his head. Such a stubborn man. Nicholas shrugged. If I give up, I will never succeed, he replied. It's either continuing or giving up, and I'm not ready to give up. Peverell sighed again. As you wish, he said. Show me what you've got. Nicholas frowned but pulled out his nearly done potion. This is the one that's most likely to succeed if I can tweak it a little bit more, he said. I'm already more than halfway there. This potion has slowed down my Perenel's aging for a few years now, but I'm not yet fully done. Peverell took the sheet and read through the recipe. There's only one thing that's missing in this brew, Peverell said. Brew it. I will help you with it. Nicholas frowned at that, confused. Why do you plan to help me? He asked him in confusion. What's in it for you if I gain immortality? Nothing and everything, Peverell replied. I'm an old man, Nicholas. There's not a lot time left for me, and when I die, Salvatio will mourn me, like he will mourn all of you when you die. I made a mistake once and removed myself from his life. I nearly lost him because of my decision. Now I'm dying, and I will be damned to leave him all alone in the world for the next centuries to come. I thought that he has the Professor Anastasius, Nicholas said. He seems to like him quite a lot. He has, Peverell said, nodding. But that doesn't change that as long as at least a few of us will stay alive for a little bit longer. It will lessen his pain. You were the one who has sworn that you will stand by Salvio's side until he doesn't need you anymore. I have never sworn that. I am far too old to stay, but I'm willing to ensure that Salvio won't feel too alone when I'm gone. Nicholas said nothing for a moment or two, then he sighed and inclined his head. So be it, he said. Help me, Peverell. Eloise liked living with the Malfoy. She had been in the past for 2 days already, and she loved every minute of it. Sal had shown her around the market of London. He had explained their life to her, and she had dutifully taken notes, quite enamored with her holiday in the past. Sal, on the other hand, wasn't happy with Eloise at all. You will have to at least try to learn the language, he told her, sighing. I won't be there for forever to translate. You won't have to, she replied. I will return to the future in another 3 days. Sal's frown just deepened at that. Donzella Louise, he said hesitatingly. It isn't a good idea to try to return to the future. At that, the young woman frowned at him. Don't worry, she said. I have a way to return. The other unspeakables made sure of it. Dunjo, Sal sighed. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. It won't do you and anybody else any good if you use that device. You have to return to the future. It's too dangerous to do so. Don't worry about it, Salvatore, she said, and saw him frown even more. He didn't like being solely called by his first name. According to him, it simply wasn't done, but Eloise thought it far too ancient to call him something akin to Signor Salvatore. It sounded stuffy in her ears. The other unspeakables have tested the device quite thoroughly, and the theory behind the time travel is sound. I'm not sure what kind of theory you and your comrades used as a base, but I don't think that it can be that sound if you look at it with arithmancy and runes. Sal replied darkly. I dearly would like to see their calculations about the time travel into the future. Eloise just rolled her eyes at that, then she clasped his shoulder. Don't worry about it, little Sal, she said, using her age as an argument. You're not even out of Hogwarts right now. You still have a lot to learn to even start to understand our work. I'm not even sure that you will ever be able to learn it, considering that there are centuries between our schooling and our knowledge. Some things don't change over time, Dunzell Eloise, he objected. And some things do, she replied, amused. Then she saw some musicians and let go of his arm to go over and listen to them. He called for her, but she didn't even try to listen, far too excited and interested in all those things around her to even think about listening to her guide. How far are you? Peverell asked when he entered Nicholas's lab again. The other man looked up from his cauldron. I'll have to add the dragon's blood next, he said. Then I'll have to stir some and add the mint and the rest of my ingredients. After that it will have to simmer a bit before I can put out the flames. Nicholas was tired. He had brewed that particular batch of potion for 3 days now. He had been combining it with chanting and a lot of runic calculations, with charms and the influence of the moon. It was alchemy he was doing, a potion based on the most powerful alchemy Nicholas had ever done in his life. And yet it hadn't been enough to create a true philosopher's stone. He was missing something very important. Nevertheless, Peverell had insisted that he brewed it even if he hadn't found the solution to his philosopher's stone problem just yet. Good, Peverell said. Add the blood and stir, then let me take over for a bit. Nicholas's eyebrows furrowed. Let you take over? He repeated, confused. The other man inclined his head. I told you that I had the solution to your problem, he said. I will take over and add what you've been missing until now to succeed. What I've been missing, Nicholas repeated before shaking his head, confused. What did I miss? Add the blood and stir, the other man replied, and Nicholas finally did what he was told, still confused by Peverell's words. Peverell stood next to him, watching him stir, and when Nicholas ended, he gently took the stirrer out of Nicholas's hands. He put it aside, pulled out a dagger, and then slit open his own wrist. Nicholas's eyes widened, but before he could stop, the Gryffindor's blood already started to flow into the cauldron. Peverell picked up the stirrer with his other hand and then started to stir again while chanting. The blue color of the potion darkened slowly to a purple. Add the mint, he said. Then proceed as if I weren't there. Nicholas looked at the other man a little bit unsurely, then he sighed and nodded. All right, he said. I'll do what you want. He took up his work again, trying to forget that there was someone else chanting along, while adding more blood to his cauldron. Eloise's time was coming to an end. Tomorrow would be her last day in the past, and somehow she regretted it a bit, but on the other hand she was looking forward to some of the comforts of her own time. Donzil, Eloise, she looked up, seeing Salvatio standing at the entrance of the library. She had retreated to the library to write down her new knowledge, and it seemed like he had finally found her. Salvatio was getting on her nerves. He was constantly trying to stop her to use her device to return home. Of course, Eloise didn't want to listen, and he had begged off for the last hours, but it didn't change the fact that she was slowly getting angry with him for his constant meddling in her affairs. "What do you want from me now, Salvatio?" she asked, exasperated. He sighed as well. "I guess we will have to talk eye to eye," he said. "I guess I have to be a lot more open with you if I want you to understand me." "If it's again about my going home, just leave it be," she said. "You are far too—" "I am over 2,000 years old, Donzol," he corrected her softly. "I have known about time travel and its possibilities for nearly as long. There's—" she snorted, interrupting him with her amusement. "You're barely 17, Salvatore," she corrected him, amused. "Your parents told me childhood stories of you." Salvatio just shrugged. "My mind is over 2,000 years old," he corrected himself, sighing. "My parents haven't told you, but I'm a Firbolg-born." Eloise frowned. "What?" His eyebrows furrowed in thought. "A creature born," he replied finally. "I'm not human. My parents may have raised me in this rebirth, but it doesn't change the fact that my mind is a lot older than my current appearance." Eloise rolled her eyes. "You look human, Salvatio," she said. "I have seen half-breeds. You can't tell me you're exactly like them." He snorted. "I'm not," he said. "I'm a fully born creature, not half-creature, half-human. Just because I look human in your eyes doesn't mean I am, Donzala." Eloise rolled her eyes, not believing him at all, but deciding to humor him. "So what? Just because you're a creature you know it better than me?" she asked. He shook his head. "No," he replied. "But unlike you, I have been searching a way back into the future for far longer than wands exist in Britain." That got her attention. "Back into the future?" she repeated in disbelief. He inclined his head. "Why else do you think I understood you from the start?" he asked, half amused, half exasperated. "I'm not exactly from your time, but I am from the future." She raised an eyebrow at that. "So, what's your original time?" she asked him finally, a little bit pensively, but still not believing him fully. He hesitated. "It's a little bit further into the future than your original time," he finally said. "And I'm actually not too interested in sharing more than necessary with you, Donzil." "So why did you tell me at all when you don't want anyone to know?" she asked him, still skeptically. "Because you mustn't return to the future like you're planning to," he replied, concern etched into every line of his face. "I've been searching for centuries for a way back, and just because you found none, I should stay as well?" she asked coolly, still not believing him but at the same time outraged by his reasoning. "No, Donzil," he said, and suddenly ice crept into his voice, and his face darkened, while his eyes got an ancient gleam to them. It suddenly wasn't too far of a thought that he actually was an ancient being anymore. "I found a way home," he said, his voice ancient and grave. "It might have taken me nearly 1,000 years to do so, but I found a way to calculate time. I found a way to travel back in time, and I found a way to travel forward. But some things shouldn't be done. Some things just aren't natural to do." "That's what you say," she said. "If you're truly from the future and found a way back into the future, why are you still here? I don't think it's too comfortable to live in the Middle Ages." He pressed his lips together at that. "It isn't, Donzil," he said. "Compared to the future, living in the past is hard. Life has a different meaning here. Living as a wizard or witch is a lot more dangerous. But I can't return to the future except the natural way, one day after another. I don't age, like you won't age when you stay, so you will see the future again, and I can't be killed like you won't be able to be killed as long as you are in the past, and maybe don't try to do it yourself." The last part he added with a wince as if remembering something. She frowned at him. So you want to tell me that you hate living in the past, and that you know a way back into your future, yet you don't use it? She asked him in disbelief. His eyes narrowed. The calculations are off, Dunze. Eloise, he replied. However you calculate your return to the future, however you put your runes, the backlash of traveling into the future will be enormous. It mustn't be done. Eloise snorted at that. You sound exactly like my professor, Salvatore, she said. Runes can accomplish everything you can wish for, he said. But that doesn't mean you should use them for it. He might have been a good professor, but he had no imagination, exactly like you. You're in the past, Donzel Eloise, Salvatore said while shaking his head, sighing. The past is your current present. The future you come from doesn't exist right now, because it isn't needed for the current present to exist. In other words, your future doesn't exist. But when you still lived into the future, your present back then was built upon the past. This past, meaning that you could travel back into the past, because from the timeline's perspective you already did. But you can't travel into the future, because from the current timeline's perspective, the future doesn't exist yet. I don't even want to know what will happen if you do try to return to the future, Donzel. For all I know, you could erase generations of humans with this act, or... Eloise rolled her eyes. Don't be silly, Salvatore, she said. If my going back in time was already part of the timeline, then my returning to the future should be it as well. Salvatore sighed and closed his eyes tiredly. No, Donzel Eloise, he said. When you were in the future, you could travel into the past, because the past was already set. The past had already happened, because without the past, your future wouldn't have existed. Meaning that sometimes in the past, in 1402, you already appeared and influenced the timeline to what you knew it would be. Exactly. And then I returned and... You traveled back in time, Donzel, Salvatore continued, ignoring her. And your present suddenly wasn't 1899 anymore, but 1402, meaning you didn't influence time in any way before you appeared, meaning that you traveling back in time hadn't happened yet, and even if you were already in the past, having already traveled back in time, it was still a possibility that you wouldn't do it in the future. But I already did. From your perspective, yes. From the timelines, no, Danjo. Salvatore interrupted her. This, he gestured around them, is your present now, not the future you come from. The future you come from hasn't happened yet, and you can't travel somewhere that hasn't happened yet. So, in other words, the only way to travel in time is backwards, not forwards, never forwards. Eloise rolled her eyes. Your theory is stupid, she said. We unspeakables already found a way to return to the future. No, Donzel. The seemingly 17-year-old shook his head tiredly. You found a way to erase you from the past again and keep you in stasis until you reappear in the future. You found a way to circumvent living through the whole history until the day you left, but you didn't find a way to travel onwards, because the future you long to return to doesn't exist yet. Eloise snorted. It's still traveling too. No, Donzel Eloise, Salvatore said. It isn't. It will put you outside of the timeline, outside of time. I don't know what effect it will have on you, but what I could find out through my calculations, it wasn't something I wanted to happen to me. There's also another fact I learned that you should think about before dismissing me, Donzel. Eloise rolled her eyes. What fact, Salvatore? She asked, exasperated. The timeline is counting on you, Donzel, he said. I lived for millennia, and everything I did influenced the future I lived in. If I hadn't lived it, my future would have been a different, maybe even a darker one. Basically, even if 404 is your present now, your 1899 was influenced by you living throughout the centuries. I don't want to know what will happen if you take yourself out of the calculation now that the current timeline has integrated you as a part of itself. Eloise rolled her eyes again. All right, she said, amused. I'll think about your theories, little Sal. And with that she stood. Good night, child, she said. Don't forget to keep on the lights to keep the monsters from appearing under your bed. With that she left and went to bed. dismissing his warning as the fear of a little boy who was far too young to understand the differences between their levels of knowledge. Sal's gaze followed her leaving. He frowned, his eyes dark with worry. He knew that she hadn't believed him, but he also knew that even if he wanted to, he couldn't stop her. He had no idea what the device she planned to use looked like, and he had no idea where to look for it. Warning her, telling her the truth had been his only chance. It seemed like he hadn't succeeded with it at all. Nicholas stared at that potion in his cauldron. It had thickened and thickened even more over the last hours. Peverell's blood was still steadily flowing into the cauldron, but unlike at the start, it now had a golden ting to it, and was filled with golden runes which danced through the cauldron before adding itself to the thick mass at its bottom. The potion looked already a lot different than anything else Nicholas had managed to produce before. "Peverell?" he asked, looking up to the deathly pale and shaking man next to him. "Are you—" "Don't worry about me," Peverell said, his voice cracked, his lips dry. "Just add the last ingredient and stir." Nicholas frowned, but nodded anyway, before doing as Peverell said. Then he closed his eyes and spoke his final chant. When he opened his eyes again, the cauldron was bathed in golden light. His eyes traveled to Peverell. The old man smiled. "It's done," he rasped. "Now promise me to look after Salvazar Ho, will you?" "Salve... What?" Nicholas asked, confused. "Salvatio," Peverell said. "Salvatio was his birth name. We always called him Sal, and I thought telling you that would be enough when I gave him to you. Now promise me to look after him." Nicholas frowned. He wanted to know more about Salvatio's birth name, but in the end he just nodded. "I will," he promised. "I will look after him until he doesn't need me anymore, until he is ready to let me go and stand on his own." Peverell nodded, satisfied. "Good," he rasped. "And tell him I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" Nicholas asked, confused. Peverell's brown eyes met Nicholas's green. "That I didn't tell him goodbye," he replied. Nicholas's eyes widened. He flung himself forward, making a grabbing motion with his hands. But his hands, instead of meeting the fabric of Peverell's clothes, closed into nothingness. Nicholas could only stare at his empty hand, sticking out of the ghostly chest of Peverell Grimm. "The last ingredient you missed," Peverell said emotionlessly, holding up his ghostly hands which had started to glow in a soft golden light. The glow spread throughout his body. Peverell smiled. "The last ingredient," he said, his voice nothing more but a ghostly whisper, "a freely given life." And with that, Peverell dissolved into a bout of golden glitter. The cauldron exploded. Nicholas was thrown back, hitting his head on the wall. The only thing left when he returned to consciousness would be an oddly shaped, blood-red stone, glittering strangely and mesmerizing in the light of the fire. Some things had a price to achieve, and Peverell had paid the price of Nicholas's philosopher's stone, gladly if it meant that Sal wouldn't lose every one of his new family within a few decades. Salah would never truly find out that Peverell had sacrificed his last years on Earth to ensure Nicholas's and Perenelle's ability to live for centuries. No one would ever find out how to produce another philosopher's stone, because Nicholas definitely wouldn't. One sacrifice was more than enough. When Eloise woke up again, her whole body ached. "What's her status?" a stranger's voice asked someone above her. "It doesn't look good, sir," a woman's voice said. Whatever experiment she was part of, something went wrong quite horribly with it. Eloise opened her mouth and groaned. She wanted to ask what happened, but her lips were dry and she couldn't speak at all. Her whole body hurt terribly. "What can you tell me about the experiment, sir?" the stranger asked. This time another voice, a voice she knew, answered. "We were testing a new way to time travel. Charles," Eloise's best friend said, and he sounded as if he was crying. "She went back in time and then used a device to return to the present. Eloise would never find out that thanks to her decision more than 25 descendants of people she met and then left to themselves in the past were unborn." "Back in time?" the stranger's voice asked. "To 1400, Charles replied, sniffing. "It should have been safe. We calculated everything. So she went back about 500 years, the stranger said. The following Tuesday of Eloise's reappearance would last for 2.5 full days. The following Thursday, on the other hand, would pass by in a mere 4 hours. She had been warned of the consequences and didn't listen, so Timeline had to suffer for her arrogance. And she's aging rapidly, the woman said. It seems as if she's aging a far greater speed than she should, and we can't stop it at all. And Eloise had to suffer the consequences for her actions as well. Please, Eloise heard Charles plead. Isn't there anything you can do? I'm sorry, the woman said, sighing, and Charles started to cry in earnest. This would also be the end of the Unspeakables' tries to go back further than a few hours. Instead, they enacted the time laws that would govern the wizards even nearly 100 years later, when 13-year-old Hermione Granger would be approved to have a time turner to attend all her classes. Eloise forced open her eyes. She was in St. Mungo's. She had gone back in time, lived there for 5 days and then returned to the present, and now she was aging rapidly, her body slowly dying. I warned you, another man's voice said sadly, but you didn't want to listen. Eloise's eyes went to the man leaning against the window, his eyes dark and sad, his clothing showing that he was working at St. Mungo's. Salve, Ferdinand, she rasped, and he smiled. Actually, he said, you first got to know me as Professor Malfoy. Her eyes widened. But yes, you are right, the man continued. I am Salvatore, the 17-year-old child you met in 1402. But, she managed to rasp out, you should have lived through the centuries like I did, he said sadly. It would have been far better for your health if you had done like I suggested. What are you doing here? He finished for her quietly, looking over at Charles, who was raging against the other healers. I'm a healer at St. Mungo's currently. Salvatore said, I gave up my teaching position some time ago and started anew. Currently I'm a healer's apprentice. He rolled his eyes at that as if being a healer's apprentice was funny in some way. Sadly, there's no way I can tell them that I've been a healer for far longer than they've been alive already, so I had to start anew, he added, clearly amused by his problems instead of annoyed. Then his face turned serious again. If you want to, I can stop the pain, he told her, his eyes grave and sympathetic. The aging, she forced out, and he shook his head. I'm sorry, he said. There are even things I can't do. I'm no god, you know. And the sorrow in his voice was real. This was your choice, he said bitterly. I researched your predicament since you left Back to the Future. I found no way to stop the consequences the moment you destroyed the timeline's pathway with your decision to return to a place that didn't exist already. I am sorry, so sorry that I'm unable to do more for you. And she could see that he meant every word he said. No, she rasped out. I am, for not listening. No one would ever find out that it was actually safe to travel back in time, as long as you came back to the future the natural way, day by day. The only one who knew, one Salazar Imras, also known as Salvatore Malfoy, would never tell anyone of his knowledge. In his eyes, not playing around with time was always the best solution anyway. Then the healer who had been treating her turned and saw her awake. She saw Salvatore gesturing discreetly, taking down a runic ward he had placed around them that had kept the others from hearing them. Madam Mintumble, you're awake, the healer said, his eyes as grave as Salvatore's. I won't survive the night, she rasped out. I'm afraid you won't, the healer said. We tried everything, but we can't stop the aging process. She forced herself to nod and then tried to lift her hand to gesture Charles near her. She wasn't able to, but Salvatore seemed to understand her intention, because he did it for her. Charles looked at Salvatore in confusion, but stepped near. Charles, she rasped, and again hot tears adorned her best friend's eyes. I'm sorry. You don't have to be sorry, Charles said, crying. We made a mistake. Our calculations were wrong somehow, and she forced herself to shake her head. I made it, she whispered. I was warned. I didn't listen. Sorry. And with that she closed her eyes. No one would ever know more about her experience in the past than what she wrote down. She never ever wrote down Salvatore Malfoy. She always called him Little Sal, so that she met someone who still lived, would forever remain a mystery. Not that anyone would have ever connected the dots anyway. Eloise's chest rose in a last shaky breath, and then there was silence. She was dead. And the last flower left on her grave was a simple little daisy, just like the daisies she was found lying in so long ago by the man who had influenced her life without ever being able to rescue her at all.